Hidden among the apple trees of Whistling Creek Valley, Eleanor Blackwood tends to her orchard with the patient precision that only comes from years of disciplined training. Her neighbors know her as the quiet widow who makes the finest apple brandy at the Harvest Festival, the one who never misses Sunday service at the White Chapel on the hill. What they don't see behind her weathered hands and gentle smile is that Eleanor Blackwood was once Lieutenant Blackwood, the Union Army's most decorated female cavalry sharpshooter during the Civil War, with 43 confirmed eliminations and 2 classified operations that saved countless Union soldiers' lives. The Scarlet Raiders are about to discover why some of the West's most dangerous outlaws never even heard the shot that took them down. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning mist clings to the rows of apple trees as Eleanor Blackwood completes her dawn inspection. Her boots leave precise patterns in the dew-covered grass, each step placed with unconscious efficiency born from years of cavalry training. She pauses at the eastern ridge, ostensibly examining an apple tree showing signs of blight, but her enhanced situational awareness catalogues every detail of the surrounding landscape. The distant rhythmic sound of horse hooves echoes through the valley. 4 riders, she notes automatically. 3 on quarter horses and 1 on a larger draft horse, likely a Percheron. Their pace suggests reconnaissance rather than casual travel. The same group that's been circling the property for the past 3 days. "That tree giving you trouble?" "Again, Eleanor," calls Samuel from the barn, his voice carrying clearly in the crisp autumn air. Her foreman of 12 years knows her tells, recognizes when she's spotted something concerning beyond the orchard's borders. "Just checking for signs of spreading," Eleanor responds, keeping her tone casual while her mind calculates sightlines, defensive positions, and potential escape routes with practiced precision. Might need to cut it before winter sets in if the treatment doesn't take. The horses grow louder before fading into the distance. Just another ride by, like the half-dozen others this week. The Scarlet Raiders establish patterns, probing defenses, looking for weaknesses. Eleanor recognizes their tactics. She used similar approaches herself during the war, in places where mistakes meant death and precision meant survival. Inside the main house, the morning newspaper lies open on the kitchen table. Another local orchard sold well below market value, the third this month. The coffee pot bubbles as Samuel enters, his weathered face creased with concern. "Thornfield's spread went for half what it's worth," he says, pouring 2 cups. "Sheriff Hollister claims old Peterson was eager to sell." "But Peterson's worked that land for 25 years, Eleanor finishes, accepting the coffee while her mind pieces together the larger pattern. "Never mentioned selling before the raiders showed up. The sound of hooves returns, closer this time. Through the kitchen window, Eleanor spots the riders. 4 men in dark dusters bearing the red bandanas of the Scarlet Raiders. Their leader, a man they call Hawkins, rides on a massive black Percheron, a horse clearly chosen for intimidation rather than practicality. His lieutenants, Monroe, Dawson, and a newer member they call Quinn, flank him on matching chestnuts. "They're getting bolder," Samuel observes quietly, watching the riders pass. Eleanor sips her coffee, her mind automatically cataloguing details that others might miss. The military bearing in Hawkins' posture despite his attempt to hide it. The way his lieutenants maintain tactical spacing without realizing it, the subtle bulges under their dusters that suggest more firepower than typical outlaws carry. The riding formation itself speaks of military training, not typical bandit behavior. "Deputy Jenkins stopped by yesterday," Samuel continues, his voice low. "Says they're just passing through, part of some railroad land development deal." He pauses, studying Eleanor's face. "You believe that?" "About as much as you do," Eleanor replies, her eyes never leaving the raiders as they pass the orchard entrance. She notes how Hawkins' gaze lingers on key tactical positions. The barn's loft, the water tower, the equipment shed, the elevated orchard section that overlooks the main approach. These aren't random patrols. They're gathering intelligence, establishing a pattern, preparing for something bigger. Their conversation is interrupted by the appearance of a wagon on the road, Dr. Martha Collins's old buckboard. The raiders surround it, forcing it to stop. Eleanor sets down her coffee, body tensing imperceptibly as she watches the confrontation unfold. Hawkins leans toward the driver's window, his voice carrying clearly in the still morning air. "Doc, been meaning to talk to you about that clinic lease." Martha's response is inaudible, but her body language speaks volumes, shoulders rigid, hands clenched on the reins. Eleanor recognizes the signs of someone being threatened, someone being forced into a corner. She's seen it before in places where violence was a currency and fear was a weapon. "Think carefully about our offer." Hawkins' voice carries that false friendliness that poorly masks menace. "Hate to see anything happen to that nice new medical equipment." The raiders roar away, leaving Martha's wagon in a cloud of dust. Eleanor watches her friend grip the reins for long moments before continuing toward town, the wagon's path slightly unsteady. "They're not just targeting orchards," Eleanor says quietly, years of tactical assessment evident in her tone. "They're moving through the whole town. The clinic first, probably the stores next." She recognizes the pattern: isolate, intimidate, control. She's seen it before in border towns across Tennessee, where Confederate sympathizers sought to establish dominance through systematic pressure. As if to punctuate her words, more hoofbeats sound in the distance. Eleanor returns to the window, watching dust clouds approach on the horizon. This time it's all 4 riders, with Hawkins again in the lead. They're done probing, done gathering intelligence. Now they're coming to make their play. Eleanor's hand brushes unconsciously against her thigh, where a cavalry carbine was once holstered through countless scouting missions. The Scarlet Raiders think they're about to pressure a simple widow into submission. Instead, they're about to learn why some of the West's most dangerous targets never knew they were in someone's sights. "Samuel," she says quietly, "I think you should head into town and maybe check on that storage shed we never talk about." Her foreman nods, understanding perfectly. The time for maintaining cover is ending. The soldier is awakening. The midday sun climbs higher over Whistling Creek Valley as Eleanor drives her weathered wagon into town. Harrison's general store, normally bustling with farmers picking up supplies, stands unusually quiet. Through the storefront window, she spots Clara Harrison arguing with Quinn, the newest Scarlet Raider. The young outlaw's bandana still looks too vivid, lacking the fade of true trail experience, but his stance suggests military training, the kind Eleanor recognizes from cavalry units in Tennessee. Inside, the store's usually welcoming atmosphere, it feels tense, like the moments before a cavalry charge. Clara's teenage daughter Abigail stands rigid behind the counter, her eyes fixed on Quinn's gloved hands as he casually knocks items off shelves. "Insurance rates are going up," Quinn announces, his voice carrying that artificial toughness that masks inexperience. "Boss says protection doesn't come cheap these days." Eleanor enters silently, her boots making no sound on the worn wooden floor, a habit ingrained from years of stealth operations. She notes the positioning of the general store's layout, sightlines to all exits, the subtle way Quinn keeps his right side angled away from view, suggesting a holstered weapon. "Everything all right, Clara?" Eleanor asks, her voice carefully modulated to project harmless concern. Through the window, she spots 2 more riders circling the block, Monroe and Dawson maintaining perimeter watch, just like she once did for high-value target operations. "Just a business discussion," Quinn turns, trying to project authority, but Eleanor sees the tells of someone playing a role, weight too far forward, hand position telegraphing intentions, amateur mistakes she'd trained countless recruits to avoid. Mrs. Blackwood, Clara's voice carries barely controlled anger. These gentlemen think we need their protection. Say accidents happen to stores that don't have proper insurance. A wagon pulls up outside, Dr. Martha Collins arriving for her. Usual morning supplies. Eleanor watches the doctor's face tighten as she spots the raiders through the window. Their eyes meet briefly, and Eleanor catches the subtle hand signal. 3 fingers brushed against skirt, an old military code meaning multiple hostile teams observed. Store's getting awfully busy lately, Quinn comments as Martha enters. Lots of expensive merchandise. Shame if something happened to all those nice glass jars. Eleanor's mind automatically calculates angles, distances, potential scenarios. 4 years as a cavalry instructor after her sharpshooter duties taught her to read people like terrain maps. Quinn's overconfidence masks uncertainty. The perimeter, riders are too focused on the street, leaving the alley exposed. More tells, suggesting military background, but without combat zone experience. The town council might have questions about certain business practices. Hawkins' voice carries from the doorway as he enters, about inventory records, tax matters, unless proper precautions are taken. Martha's hand tightens on her shopping basket. I maintain full compliance with all regulations, she says firmly. For now, Hawkins' smile doesn't reach his eyes. Eleanor recognizes the expression. She'd seen it on Confederate officers and guerrilla leaders, men who confused fear. With respect, a police horse trots past, Deputy Jenkins carefully looking anywhere but at the store. Eleanor catalogues another piece of the puzzle. Law enforcement already compromised, just like certain local officials in border counties had been during the war. Think about our offers, ladies, Hawkins announces. Both of you. Things are changing in Whistling Creek. Smart business owners adapt. The raiders depart with practice coordination, their formation maintaining tactical spacing. Eleanor helps Clara write the knocked-over displays, her mind processing multiple layers of information. The threats aren't random. The clinic, the store, the orchards, they're isolating key community resources, establishing control points. They came to the clinic yesterday, Martha says quietly once the raiders are gone, asked about certain patients, about our medicine stocks, said they could help streamline our inventory reporting. Peterson sold his orchard for half its worth, Clara adds, hands shaking slightly as she straightens merchandise. 25 years he worked that land. Then these men show up and suddenly he's eager to sell, and he's not the only one. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. Eleanor's specially modified pocket watch vibrates, a secure message from contacts she's maintained since leaving the service. Movement in region, unknown group showing interest in Whistling Creek area, possible connection to transcontinental railroad development. The pieces start fitting together. The Scarlet Raiders aren't just another outlaw gang. Their military bearing, their systematic approach to the town, the focus on transportation routes and key facilities, their advance forces for something bigger. Through the store window, Eleanor spots more riders arriving. 6 this time, with new faces. The Scarlet Raiders are growing, establishing a stronger presence. She recognizes the pattern from the war, where small guerrilla groups would gradually expand, testing local resistance, building infrastructure for larger operations. Abigail saw them at the schoolhouse yesterday, Clara says softly, watching her daughter stock shelves. Just sitting there during recess, watching the children, making sure we got the message. Eleanor's hand brushes unconsciously against her. A collar, where battle scars hide beneath her high-necked dress. She'd sworn to leave that life behind, to be just another member of this community. But watching Clara's hands shake, seeing Martha's tight expression, remembering how conflicts start with small compromises, with people looking away, with fear taking root. We should form a neighborhood watch, she suggests carefully. maintaining a cover, share information, keep track of suspicious activity. Martha's eyes meet hers, recognizing the tactical suggestion behind the civilian words, like those community defense groups in border counties, the ones formed during the worst fighting. I know some people, Martha continues. From my time with the medical corps, they might have relevant experience for community organization. More horses thunder past the store, the noise deliberately intimidating. But Eleanor's mind is already shifting from observation to planning. The Scarlet Raiders think they're dealing with helpless civilians, with soft targets to be pressured into submission. They're about to learn why some of the most effective resistance forces start with people who look harmless, who know how to hide their strength until the perfect moment to strike. The soldier isn't just awakening. She's starting to hunt. Dust billows behind approaching horses as the Scarlet Raiders make their first direct move on Whistling Creek's north side businesses. Eleanor observes from the shadowed porch of McIntyre's smithy, her posture deliberately casual as she discusses horseshoe prices with the blacksmith. Her peripheral vision catches movement across the street. Two more raiders taking positions at strategic corners, establishing what they believe is effective surveillance. "Prices seem fair, Mr. McIntyre," she says just loudly enough to be heard by Monroe, who's pretending to examine notices on the bulletin board. "I'll need 6 sets before the harvest teams arrive." The blacksmith nods, understanding Eleanor's coded message. 6 of her former military contacts will arrive within the week, disguised as seasonal workers. The movement of his hammer against the anvil covers their real conversation. "Heard Peterson's property sold for almost nothing," McIntyre mutters, shaping red-hot iron with practiced precision. The sheriff wouldn't even take his complaint about being threatened. Eleanor allows herself a small frown while mentally cataloguing another piece of the pattern developing across Whistling Creek. The smithy would be the raiders' next logical target. Controlling metalwork meant controlling tools, wagon repairs, horseshoes, and weapons maintenance. "Strange coincidence," she replies, watching as Dawson rides past for the 3rd time in an hour. How many folks suddenly decide to sell once these men arrive in town? The schoolhouse bell rings in the distance, and Eleanor's attention shifts momentarily to the children spilling into the schoolyard. 2 raiders sit motionless on their horses across from the school entrance, an implicit threat no parent could miss. "They visited Fletcher's mill yesterday," McIntyre says, his voice lowered, though his hammering continues. "Told him his water rights might be reviewed unless he paid for their protection. His operation can't survive without that creek access." Eleanor nods slightly, adding another data point to her mental map of the raiders' systematic campaign. Control the smithy for tools and repairs, the mill for grain processing, the general store for supplies, the doctor's office for medical care, isolate, intimidate, establish territorial control. Military tactics applied to civilian targets. "Miss Eleanor," young Timothy Fletcher calls, running up with an envelope. "Ma said to give you this right away." The boy hands her a sealed note before darting off toward the school. Eleanor casually opens it, appearing to read a simple message while actually decoding the hidden meaning in certain marked letters. "Railroad survey team arriving Friday. Armed. Guards. Meeting at midnight. Usual place." Through the window of the telegraph office, Eleanor spots Sheriff Hollister deep in conversation with Hawkins. The sheriff's gestures are placating, submissive, a man already compromised, more puzzle pieces falling into place. Whatever operation the raiders are fronting for has already secured local law enforcement. Eleanor's pocket watch vibrates twice, the signal that Samuel has successfully accessed their hidden cache of equipment. Good. They'll need specialized tools for what comes next. The raiders' attention shifts as a stagecoach approaches, right on schedule. Eleanor watches as Quinn and Monroe take positions. On either side of the road, another probe, another test of boundaries. The stage driver slows, clearly unnerved by their presence. A passenger peers nervously through the window. A well-dressed man clutching a leather portfolio marked with the logo of the Western Pacific Railroad Company. The pieces click into place with military precision. Railroad development means land acquisition, which explains the pattern of forced property sales. But legitimate railroad companies don't employ outlaw gangs with military precision. Someone else is behind this, using the raiders as their enforcement arm. Eleanor makes her way toward the apothecary, timing her arrival to coincide with Dr. Martha Collins' weekly visit. Inside, they exchange seemingly casual greetings while Martha slips her a folded paper hidden within a package of medicinal herbs. "These should help with those headaches you mentioned," Martha says, loud enough for anyone listening. More quietly, she adds, 3 more families threatened yesterday. North County properties along the proposed rail line. Jenkins refused to investigate." Eleanor accepts the package, her fingers briefly touching the hidden message. "Much appreciated, Doctor. Samuel mentioned the same remedy helped his cousin. The code is simple. Samuel has confirmed additional intelligence through his network of former soldiers." Through the shop window, Eleanor watches as Hawkins himself leads another patrol through town, this time moving with deliberate slowness, past key businesses. His performance is meant to be seen, meant to establish dominance through visible presence. Amateur, psychological tactics, but effective against civilians without combat experience. Eleanor calculates the raiders now number at least 15. Far more than the original 4 who first appeared a week ago. Their resources are growing, their confidence expanding with each unopposed action. They've established a pattern of daily intimidation, splitting into smaller units to cover more territory while maintaining central command. "Mrs. Blackwood," calls Clara Harrison, hurrying across the street with a basket. "I've brought those preserves you ordered." The basket contains no preserves. Instead, Eleanor finds a rough map marking raider patrol routes and timings, meticulously, documented by Clara's teenage daughter from the vantage point of the general store's upper window. "Perfect timing," Eleanor responds, her expression conveying genuine gratitude. "I was just about to head back to the orchard. Would you care to join me?" The invitation serves dual purposes, protecting Clara from immediate retaliation while allowing them to speak privately on the road back to Blackwood Orchard. As they climb into Eleanor's wagon, 4 more raiders ride into town from the east, newcomers, their expressions arrogant with the confidence of men who believe intimidation equals strength. "Fresh recruits," Eleanor observes quietly as they leave town. Their leaders building forces faster than anticipated. Clara's hands twist nervously in her lap. "They visited Reverend Walsh last night, said his church might face structural inspection issues unless he made a substantial donation to their cause." Eleanor processes this information with tactical efficiency. Targeting the church represents an escalation, moving from economic pressure to attacking the community's spiritual center. "They're following a standard military pattern," she explains, keeping her voice conversational while her mind assembles. The strategic overview. First, isolate key resources, then undermine community leadership. Finally, break resistance through targeted pressure on vulnerable points. When they reach a secluded stretch of road, Eleanor guides the horses to a stop, pulling a small leather-bound journal from beneath the wagon seat. "Clara, I need you to document everything. Every threat, every intimidation, every property sale. Names, dates, witnesses." She hands over the journal. "These aren't random acts. They're a coordinated campaign with specific targets and timeline." Clara accepts the journal, recognition dawning in her eyes. "You've seen this before." Eleanor's expression shifts subtly, the civilian mask momentarily giving way to the cavalry officer beneath. "During the war, yes, Confederate guerrillas used similar tactics against Union-sympathizing towns, systematic pressure designed to break resistance before the actual fighting begins." As they approach the orchard, Eleanor spots unfamiliar hoofprints. In the soft earth of the access road, someone has been watching her property again, this time approaching from the less visible western boundary. "Get word to Martha and McIntyre," she instructs as they reach the main house. "Tell them we will meet tonight at the old hunting cabin, 9 o'clock. After Clara departs, Eleanor makes her way to the barn, where Samuel awaits with news of his own. "6 men at the abandoned Fletcher property," he reports, spreading a hand-drawn map across a workbench, "setting up some kind of headquarters, heavy traffic in and out, mostly at night." Eleanor studies the map, noting the strategic positioning of the property. High ground overlooking the valley's northern approaches, good visibility of the main road, multiple escape routes through the hills. "Not just outlaw camp," she observes, tracing potential sightlines with practiced precision. "Forward operating base, military standard." Samuel nods, unsurprised by her assessment. As her former cavalry unit's quartermaster, he recognizes the tactical significance. "Spotted surveying equipment being unloaded yesterday, not the kind farmers use, professional grade." "Railroad survey teams don't normally travel with armed escorts," Eleanor adds, mentally connecting more threads of the emerging pattern, "or operate from hidden bases." The distant sound of approaching riders interrupts their conversation. Samuel quickly conceals the map while Eleanor moves to the barn door, calculating angles and distances with automatic precision. 4 raiders, including Hawkins and Quinn, approaching from the main road, not bothering to hide their approach this time. "Stay inside," she instructs Samuel. "Watch from the loft window. Signal if you spot others approaching from different directions." Eleanor steps onto the porch, her posture deliberately relaxed, everything about her appearance projecting vulnerability and uncertainty. Yet her mind operates with cold, tactical efficiency, noting each rider's position, weapons, and demeanor. Hawkins kills his horse's momentum with practiced skill, the massive Percheron stopping precisely at the edge of her property. His lieutenants spread out in what they believe is tactical formation, Quinn and Dawson to the west, Monroe covering the eastern approach. Their positioning betrays military training, but their overconfidence creates multiple blind spots a trained observer would never miss. "Mrs. Blackwood," Hawkins' voice carries that false courtesy that poorly masks predatory intent. "Beautiful day for a ride." His boots crunch on gravel as he approaches the porch steps, stopping just short to look up at her. The positioning attempt to establish dominance would be almost laughable to someone who'd commanded cavalry units against Confederate sharpshooters. "Mr. Hawkins," Eleanor lets a slight tremor enter her voice while her mind calculates distances, angles, reaction times. "We're not interested in selling. I already told your men last week." "Now see, that's not entirely accurate," Hawkins spreads, his hands in a gesture of reasonable negotiation. She'd seen countless times from Southern officers before they revealed their true intentions. "Your foreman told my associates you needed time to think. We've given you that time. Now we're here to discuss a very generous offer." Behind him, Monroe shifts his duster deliberately, displaying the revolver holstered beneath. Eleanor catalogues it automatically. Colt Army Model 1860, poor grip technique, at least 3 seconds to draw given his stance. The others carry similar weapons, all displayed with the same clumsy attempt at intimidation that screams more bravado than actual combat experience. $8,000, Hawkins continues. "Well above market value, because we respect what you've built here." His smile doesn't reach his eyes. "We're businessmen, Mrs. Blackwood. We believe in fair compensation." The screen door creaks as Samuel steps onto the porch, his arrival timed perfectly based on their practice protocols. Hawkins' men tense slightly at the unexpected appearance. Quinn takes 2 steps forward, hand drifting toward his weapon, but Hawkins waves him back. "Mr. Williams," Hawkins' voice carries forced patience. "Wasn't expecting to see you home. Thought you'd be in town considering recent developments." Eleanor watches Samuel's shoulders tighten almost imperceptibly as he processes the implied threat. Their eyes meet briefly. She signals patience using the subtle hand code they developed during the war. Through her enhanced hearing, she catches fragments of conversation from Quinn, poorly concealed behind a cupped hand. Convoy confirmed, leaving Carson City. Need secure point at Whistling Creek. Expansion starting Monday. Hawkins' expression flickers for just a moment, annoyance at the operational security breach. Eleanor mentally logs every detail. Carson City location, the term secure point, the implied logistics chain, pieces of a larger puzzle starting to form. Think about the offer. Hawkins backs away, maintaining eye contact. 8,000 buys a lot of peace of mind, lots of security, lot of insurance. The threat hangs in the air like gunsmoke. The raiders mount up with practiced coordination, but Eleanor notices how they split at the road, two heading toward town, two turning north toward the abandoned Fletcher property. Another piece of the pattern was revealed. They visited Reverend Walsh last night, Samuel says quietly, once the raiders are gone. Men I've never seen before, taking measurements, making notes. Tell me. Eleanor keeps her voice gentle while her mind calculates angles, options, strategies. They damaged the church bell, said it was an accident, said it would be a shame if more accidents happened, if building inspections failed, if services had to be suspended. Eleanor moves to the window, watching dust clouds fade on the horizon. She guides Samuel inside, mind working on multiple levels. The church's location near the northern road, the orchard's strategic position, Carson City supply lines, secure points and convoys. A pattern emerges, one she'd seen before in darker places. They're not just buying land, she says quietly, years of tactical assessment evident in her tone. They're building a corridor, supply lines, transfer points, using legitimate businesses as cover. Her voice carries the same precision that once made Confederate commanders tremble. The question is, what are they moving? A distant rider approaches. One of Martha's clinic assistants. He dismounts at the gate, ties something to the fence post. Even from here she can see the red notice, a health department condemnation. They're done playing nice, Samuel observes. No, Eleanor agrees softly. Now they'll try force, pressure, intimidation. She turns from the window, and Samuel sees his employer's careful mask slip, revealing the soldier beneath. What they don't understand is that some people don't respond well to pressure. Some people push back. The sound of more horses echoes off distant mountains. The Scarlet Raiders are mobilizing in force, preparing to take what they want, but they're about to learn that the most dangerous predators are often the ones who appear. The weakest, the ones who know how to wait, the ones who've spent years hiding their true nature. The soldier is stirring. The hunt is about to begin. Moonlight filters through the pine boughs, surrounding the old hunting cabin, as Eleanor arrives precisely at 9 o'clock. She approaches on foot, having secured her horse a quarter-mile back, an old cavalry habit that saved her life more than once. The cabin sits in a small clearing, half hidden from the main trail, perfectly positioned to observe approaching visitors while remaining concealed. Inside, oil lamps cast flickering shadows across concerned faces. Martha Collins leans against the stone fireplace, her medical bag beside her. McIntyre, the blacksmith, occupies a handcrafted chair in the corner, his massive frame at odds with his careful stillness. Clara Harrison and Samuel Williams stand near the map-covered table, voices hushed in serious conversation. Two unexpected figures complete the gathering. Reverend Walsh, his clerical collar visible beneath a worn hunting jacket, and Benjamin Fletcher, the mill owner, his normally cheerful expression replaced by grim determination. "Didn't expect to see you here, Reverend," Eleanor comments as she secures the door behind her. "When men threaten God's house to silence his servants, staying quiet isn't an option," Walsh replies, the steel in his voice matching the resistance. Forming in this hidden meeting, Eleanor surveys the assembled group, each representing a critical community resource, each now targeted by the Scarlet Raiders. This gathering wouldn't look out of place in a military council of war, which is precisely what it's becoming. You've all experienced their tactics firsthand, she begins, moving to the table where Clara has arranged her journal documenting raider activities. What we're facing isn't random banditry, it's a coordinated campaign with military precision. She spreads a map across the tabletop, the valley carefully rendered with markings indicating raider patrol routes, observation posts, and property acquisitions. In the past 2 weeks, they've established control over key access points, Eleanor continues, her finger tracing routes with tactical precision. North Road, East Bridge, Phillips Pass. They've targeted strategic properties, those controlling water access, transportation routes, high ground with clear sightlines. Not the behavior of common outlaws, Martha observes, her experience as a war nurse evident in her analytical tone. No, Eleanor agrees. These men have military training, poorly applied, but recognizable to those who know what to look for. The question is, why Whistling Creek? Fletcher asks, running calloused fingers through thinning hair. We're not exactly a major settlement. Eleanor produces another map, this one showing a larger region with proposed railroad routes marked in red pencil. Samuel obtained this from a contact in Carson City. The official Western Pacific proposed route bypasses our valley entirely. She overlays a second transparent sheet marked with different routes. But someone's very interested in establishing an alternate line through Whistling Creek, one that doesn't appear on any official documents. The implication hangs in the air like gun smoke after a volley. Smuggling route, McIntyre concludes, his blacksmith's eyes recognizing the pattern. Using the railroad as cover. Precisely, Eleanor confirms. The abandoned Fletcher property they've occupied gives perfect oversight of the valley's northern approach. Their pattern of acquisitions creates a corridor running southwest to northeast, bypassing normal inspection points at Fort Sterling. Martha leans forward, studying the map with growing understanding. I've been tracking unusual supply requests from neighboring counties. Medicines that normally treat mining injuries but aren't going to active mines. Patent compounds containing laudanum in quantities no legitimate doctor would prescribe. Opium smuggling, Reverend Walsh says quietly. God help us. Eleanor nods, pleased at their quick comprehension. Not just opium. According to my contacts, valuable shipments from San Francisco destined for mining operations have been disappearing. Winchester repeaters, precision blasting equipment, industrial chemicals, all vanishing between departure and arrival. And a railway through our valley provides the perfect alternate route, Fletcher concludes. One without military oversight or federal inspection, which explains their urgency and growing numbers, Samuel adds. They need to secure the corridor before authorities connect the disappearances to their operation. Eleanor watches, their faces as understanding, transforms fear into resolve, exactly what she'd hoped for. These aren't just frightened townspeople anymore. They're becoming a resistance cell, analyzing threats with growing tactical awareness. They're expecting us to respond like civilians, she explains, to either sell under pressure or attempt ineffective resistance they can easily overwhelm. Their timeline requires quick acquisition, not prolonged conflict. So what's our strategy? Clara asks, the shopkeeper's practical nature asserting itself. Eleanor smiles, recognizing the same directness she'd valued in her cavalry scouts. First, we document everything. Clara's journal provides evidence for federal authorities once we've gathered enough proof of their operation. She moves small wooden markers across the map, tokens Samuel had carved to represent their limited resources. Second, we establish our own surveillance. Martha's clinic assistants move throughout the valley without raising suspicion. They'll document raider movements, identify newcomers, and track pattern changes. Martha nods, already mentally assigning roles to her trusted staff. McIntyre's apprentices deliver metalwork to every farm in the region, Eleanor continues. They'll serve as our messengers, carrying coded information with legitimate deliveries. The blacksmith grunts approval, his massive arms folded across his chest. Reverend, your church bell rings as time signals are heard across the entire valley. 3 rings at non-standard hours can serve as warnings of raider movements without, alerting them to our communication. Walsh smiles slightly. Divine communication serves earthly protection. Fitting. And what of direct confrontation? Fletcher asks, the practical concern of a man whose livelihood stands directly in the raider's path. Eleanor's expression shifts subtly, the civilian facade momentarily giving way to something harder, something forged in combat. We avoid it. For now, direct conflict with superior numbers before we're properly prepared would be suicide. She adjusts another marker on the map, this one positioned at her orchard. Instead, we make ourselves difficult targets, unpredictable movements. Varied schedules never alone when possible. We create uncertainty without providing justification for escalation. And if they escalate anyway, McIntyre's question cuts to the heart of their vulnerability. Eleanor meets his gaze steadily. Then we implement the second phase of our response. But not before we're ready. She doesn't elaborate, but something in her tone silences further questions. The civilian widow recedes momentarily, revealing glimpses of the cavalry officer accustomed to planning operations where lives hung in the balance. Samuel will show each of you specific routes to use when coming here, she continues, businesslike, efficiency returning to her voice. Alternate paths, emergency signals, recognition codes. From this moment forward, we operate as a coordinated unit, not isolated individuals. As the meeting proceeds into detailed planning, Eleanor watches her, unlikely resistance force with growing satisfaction. Each brings specific skills and resources, Martha's medical knowledge and clinic network, McIntyre's physical strength and metalworking capabilities, Fletcher's understanding of water routes and milling operations, Walsh's community influence, and moral authority, Clara's unassuming ability to gather intelligence through daily commerce. Together, they represent Whistling Creek's core, the heart that the Scarlet Raiders must break to control the valley. But instead of finding frightened civilians, the Outlaws are unknowingly facing a resistance cell being shaped by a veteran cavalry officer who once specialized in asymmetric warfare against superior forces. The planning session continues past midnight, interrupted only when Samuel signals from his watchpost outside, riders approaching from the north. The lamps are quickly extinguished, plunging the cabin into darkness broken only by thin moonlight through shuttered windows. Eleanor moves to a carefully positioned viewing slit, her body automatically adjusting to optimize both concealment and sightlines, movements that speak of extensive combat experience. 3 riders, she whispers, recognizing the silhouettes against the moonlit ridge. Monroe and 2 I haven't identified yet. Standard patrol pattern, not searching specifically. The group remains motionless, barely breathing as hoofbeats pass. Within 50 yards of their position, Eleanor notes the raiders' sloppy perimeter sweep, predictable timing, excessive noise, poor light discipline. More evidence of militia-level training without actual combat refinement. They're expanding patrol routes, she observes once the riders have passed, establishing broader territorial control before moving to the next phase, which is... Fletcher asks. Consolidation, Eleanor replies with certainty born of experience. They've mapped the territory, identified key resources, and established initial presence. Next comes actual control, enforced compliance, not just intimidation. How long before they reach that stage? Martha's question reflects the practical concerns of a medical professional accustomed to triage, Eleanor considers the operational timeline revealed by their intelligence gathering. Their increased recruitment suggests urgency. Materials are likely already moving through their network. I'd estimate 3 to 5 days before they begin active enforcement. That's when the real violence will start, Samuel adds grimly. Yes, Eleanor acknowledges, which is why we'll be prepared before they reach that stage. As the meeting concludes, Eleanor assigns specific tasks to each member of their growing resistance. Clara will continue documenting raider activities in town. Martha will track suspicious injuries and medical supplies. McIntyre will modify tools for defensive purposes while maintaining his smithy's normal operations. Fletcher will monitor water routes for unusual traffic. Walsh will use his pastoral visits to gather intelligence from outlying farms. Meet back here in 2 days, Eleanor instructs as they prepare to depart via separate routes. Use the recognition signal Samuel taught you. If anything changes before then, Martha's youngest assistant will deliver messages disguised as medicine deliveries. The group disperses into the darkness, each taking carefully planned paths back to their homes. Eleanor remains behind with Samuel, studying the maps one final time before destroying them. They're still watching the orchard, Samuel reports. 2 men at the ridge overlook, changing shifts every 6 hours. Eleanor nods, unsurprised. Good. Let them watch the house, the barn, the obvious approaches. It keeps their attention where we want it. In the flickering lamplight, she unlocks a hidden compartment in the cabin's floor, revealing an oiled canvas bundle she hasn't opened since arriving in Whistling Creek 7 years ago. The leather wrapping falls away to reveal a modified Spencer carbine, the specialized weapon that made her the Union Army's most effective cavalry sharpshooter. I hoped to never use this again, she says quietly, her fingers automatically checking the action with practiced precision. Sometimes the past has other ideas, Samuel responds, watching his friend transition from widow to warrior with each professional movement of her hands. Eleanor disassembles the weapon with fluid efficiency, each component inspected with meticulous care before being reassembled into a deadly whole. The process takes less than 2 minutes, muscle memory preserved through years of civilian life. We should check the cache at Blackwood Ridge, she decides, securing the weapon in its hiding place. Make sure everything's still functional after all these years? Samuel nods, understanding the implications. The ammunition would have degraded. We'll need fresh powder, new percussion caps. McIntyre can help with that, Eleanor confirms. His forge work isn't limited to horseshoes, though he's careful about who knows it. They extinguish the final lamp, allowing their eyes to adjust to darkness before moving outside. The night has deepened, clouds obscuring moonlight that might otherwise reveal their movement to distant observers. Hawkins isn't the real threat, Eleanor observes as they move silently through the pine forest. He's just the visible face. Whoever's backing this operation has resources, political connections, and a sophisticated distribution network. The Scarlet Raiders are just their enforcement arm, meaning we're facing something much bigger than a local gang, Samuel concludes. Yes, Eleanor acknowledges grimly, which is why our strategy must focus on exposing their operation to federal authorities, not just protecting individual properties. They, separate at the forest edge, taking different routes back to the orchard as a basic security precaution. Eleanor approaches from the eastern boundary, using natural features to conceal her movement despite the darkness. Old habits from scouting Confederate positions along the Tennessee border serve her well as she slips past the Raider observation post without detection. The main house appears peaceful, lamps extinguished hours ago to maintain the illusion of normal routine. But as Eleanor approaches the barn through the shadows of the apple trees, she spots an unexpected movement near the equipment shed, a figure attempting concealment behind stacked crates. Her body responds automatically, dropping. into a combat-ready stance while calculating angles and options. The intruder hasn't spotted her yet, his attention focused on the main house. His posture suggests military training, but lacks the fluid confidence of actual combat experience. Eleanor circles silently, utilizing cover and shadow with practiced efficiency. The orchard she's tended for 7 years becomes tactical terrain, each tree a potential shield, each shadow a pathway for undetected movement. She approaches from behind, covering the final distance in a rush of controlled motion. The intruder has no chance to react before finding himself pinned against the shed wall, a forearm pressed against his throat with precise pressure, enough to control but not cause lasting damage. "Quinn," she identifies him in the dim starlight, "quite far from your usual patrol route." The young raider struggles briefly before freezing as Eleanor applies slightly more pressure. His eyes widen with shock as he registers that his captor is the seemingly helpless widow he'd been assigned to intimidate. "How did you—" he begins, but Eleanor cuts him off with increased pressure. "You're going to deliver a message to Hawkins," she instructs, her voice transformed from the gentle orchard owner to something cold and commanding. "Tell him I'm still not selling. Tell him I never will." She releases him with a controlled movement that sends him stumbling away, hand reflexively reaching for his holstered revolver. "I wouldn't," Eleanor advises calmly, already positioned at an angle that would make his draw attempt suicidal. "You're better trained than that, Lieutenant Quinn." His hand freezes, eyes widening at her use of his former military rank, information he'd never shared with the townspeople. "Yes, I know who you were," Eleanor continues, maintaining perfect positioning despite the darkness. 23rd Virginia Infantry, discharged after Gettysburg, now riding with criminals instead of soldiers. Quinn's shock is visible even in the dim light. "How could you possibly—" "Your left-handed cavalry draw, the way you position your feet when standing guard, the hand signals you use with Monroe." Eleanor's voice carries the quiet authority of someone who's studied military behavior professionally. "You were an officer once, a man of honor. Now you're threatening school children and intimidating widows." Something shifts in Quinn's expression. Shame, perhaps, or the uncomfortable recognition of how far he's fallen from his former standards. "They'll kill you," he warns, a hint of his former officer's integrity surfacing briefly. Hawkins isn't acting alone. There are powerful men behind this operation, men who don't care about casualties. "I'm counting on you to remember that there are lines soldiers don't cross," Eleanor responds, deliberately invoking his military past. "When the time comes, Lieutenant," she gestures toward the property boundary, maintaining perfect tactical positioning that would give her the advantage should he choose confrontation. Quinn hesitates, clearly reassessing the seemingly helpless widow who has so thoroughly controlled their encounter. "Who are you?" he asks finally. "Just an orchard owner." Eleanor replies, the steel beneath her civilian persona momentarily visible. "For now." Quinn retreats, glancing back several times as if unable to reconcile what just happened with his previous assessment of his target. Eleanor watches him disappear into the darkness, calculating the impact this encounter will have on the raiders. Operational planning. The confrontation serves multiple purposes, creating uncertainty among the raiders, establishing Eleanor as something more than a vulnerable civilian, and potentially creating division within their ranks by appealing to Quinn's former military honor. As she continues to the main house, Eleanor recognizes that the real strategic game is now beginning. The Scarlet Raiders believe they're executing a simple intimidation campaign against helpless civilians. Instead, they've encountered the first signs of organized resistance led by someone who understands their tactics better than they do themselves. The Next few days will determine whether Whistling Creek falls under outlaw control or becomes the staging ground for the exposure of a criminal enterprise extending far beyond their peaceful valley. Either way, the Widow's Orchard has just become the front line in a conflict the raiders never anticipated when they selected their targets. The soldier isn't just awake now, she's directing operations on familiar territory against an enemy that doesn't yet realize they're being hunted rather than hunting. Dawn breaks over Whistling Creek Valley with an unnatural stillness. Eleanor completes her morning orchard inspection with heightened vigilance, noting fresh hoofprints along the eastern perimeter, tracks made sometime after midnight, judging by their position atop the evening dew but beneath the morning frost. The pattern suggests multiple riders moving with deliberate stealth, no longer bothering to stay on established trails. Samuel appears at her side, wordlessly handing her a folded paper delivered by one of Martha's clinic assistants just minutes earlier. "Riders at Fletcher's Mill," Eleanor reads aloud, decoding Martha's carefully neutral medical terminology. 6 men, heavily armed, demanded inspection rights to all shipments. Fletcher refused. "Inspection rights," Samuel echoes, understanding. "The strategic implications. They're establishing checkpoints, controlling movement through the valley." Eleanor nods, folding the message into a tight square before burning it methodically over her pocket matchbox. Classic territorial control tactics. Next, they'll restrict travel, then implement a permit system, then enforce curfews. She studies the distant tree line, calculating sight lines with practiced precision. They're accelerating their timeline. Something's changed. The orchard's morning quiet is broken by approaching hoofbeats, a single rider moving at urgent speed. Through her father's old field glasses, Eleanor identifies Timothy Fletcher, the miller's 14-year-old son, riding hard toward Blackwood Orchard. "Get him inside quickly," she instructs Samuel, her tone shifting to operational command. Check for pursuers. Timothy arrives in a cloud of dust, his young face pale with exertion and fear. Eleanor guides him swiftly into the kitchen, while Samuel secures the perimeter, checking for any raiders who might have followed the boy. "They hurt Pa," Timothy blurts, as Eleanor hands him water. "Monroe and 2 others. When Pa refused to let them search our grain shipments." "How badly?" Eleanor asks, her voice calm despite the tactical calculations running through her mind. "Broke his arm." Timothy's hands shake around the water glass. "Said it was a warning. Said next time they'd take more than an arm. Deputy Jenkins just watched. Didn't do anything." Eleanor's expression remains composed, but something cold flickers behind her eyes. The disciplined anger of a combat veteran, rather than civilian distress. "Your father's at Dr. Collins' clinic now," she confirms, already formulating response options. Timothy nods, gulping water. "Ma sent me here 'cause she said you'd know what to do. Said to tell you they're moving faster than expected." Eleanor exchanges a glance with Samuel, who's returned from checking the property boundaries. Their silent communication confirms mutual understanding. The confrontation timeline has accelerated dramatically. "You'll stay here today," she tells Timothy with gentle firmness. "Samuel will send word to your mother that you're safe." Samuel departs immediately, taking the back trails to town. Eleanor leads Timothy to the kitchen table, spreading a hand-drawn map before him. "I need you to show me exactly where the raiders were positioned," she requests, her tone making it clear this isn't idle curiosity. How many men, which directions they watched, where they placed their horses. Timothy's fear gradually gives way to focused concentration as Eleanor guides him through a structured intelligence debriefing. The boy's natural observational skills emerge as he details the raiders' positions with surprising precision. They kept looking north, he concludes, pointing to an unmarked trail on the map, like they were expecting something from that direction. Eleanor nods appreciatively. "You'd have made an excellent scout, Timothy." The boy straightens slightly at the unexpected praise. Pa says I notice things others don't. A valuable skill, Eleanor confirms, making additional notations on the map. One that will help us protect the town. Eleanor's modified pocket watch vibrates, a signal from her surveillance network that additional threats are approaching. She moves to the window, field glasses ready, scanning the western approach. 3 riders, she informs Timothy, her voice shifting subtly to the calm precision of a military officer assessing tactical developments. Hawkins, Monroe, and a man I don't recognize, heavily armed, moving with purpose. She guides Timothy to the root cellar, a concealed space beneath the kitchen with a hidden exit tunnel that emerges in the orchard's northern section. Wait here, she instructs, handing him a small brass bell. If anyone other than Samuel or myself opens that door, use the tunnel. Ring this only in an emergency. 1 sharp ring, then silence. Timothy nods solemnly, clutching the bell. The look of absolute trust in his eyes momentarily catches Eleanor off guard. It's been years since she commanded men in combat, since others looked to her for protection and leadership. The responsibility settles on her shoulders like a familiar weight. Eleanor returns to the main floor, arranging her features into an expression of surprised concern as the raiders approach her porch. She opens the door before they can pound on, it disrupting their planned intimidation with a seemingly innocent greeting. "Mr. Hawkins," she acknowledges with perfectly calibrated nervousness. This is becoming quite the regular visit. Hawkins dismounts with exaggerated slowness, his movements designed to project menace. The unknown rider remains horseback, positioned to maintain sightlines across the property, a more professional tactical choice than the raiders typically demonstrate. "Unfortunate business at Fletcher's Mill this morning," Hawkins announces without preamble. "Man should have cooperated with a reasonable inspection request." "I heard there was some trouble," Eleanor replies carefully, monitoring Monroe's position as he angles toward the barn. "I'm sure it was just a misunderstanding." "Misunderstandings can be dangerous," Hawkins responds, mounting the porch steps with deliberate heaviness. "Especially when people don't understand how things are changing in Whistling Creek." Eleanor notes multiple details simultaneously: the fresh blood spatter on Monroe's sleeve, the unknown rider's military-grade binoculars, Hawkins' unusually aggressive positioning. Their body language suggests escalation, a planned intimidation more serious than previous visits. "Fletcher resisted progress," Hawkins continues, now standing uncomfortably close. "Progress comes anyway. Smart folks adapt. Others get hurt." "I'm just a widow running an orchard," Eleanor responds, allowing her voice to tremble slightly, while her mind calculates exact distances to concealed weapons positioned throughout the property. "I don't want any trouble. Trouble's already here." "Mrs. Blackwood," Hawkins gestures expansively across her orchard. "Railroads coming through this valley. Properties along the route have 2 choices: sell willingly for good money or have their land condemned for public use. Either way, progress wins." "Condemnation requires legal proceedings," Eleanor objects, maintaining her facade of civilian naivety. "The county judge, Judge Matthews, has already approved the necessary papers," Hawkins interrupts, producing an official-looking document from inside his coat. "Signed yesterday. Fletcher's property, Harrison's store land, Reverend Walsh's church ground, and this orchard, all designated for railroad acquisition under eminent domain." Eleanor accepts the document, recognizing the forged county seal even as she feigns distressed surprise. The signatures appear genuine, further evidence of corruption extending into local government. "But this is my home," she protests, calculating how this development affects their resistance timeline. "Where would I go?" "That's not my concern," Hawkins replies coldly. "You have until tomorrow to accept our payment offer and vacate. After that, the property will be cleared with or without your cooperation. The threat hangs in the air between them." Eleanor notes Monroe returning from his inspection of the barn, his expression suggesting he found nothing of the surveillance equipment she's carefully concealed. "Tomorrow isn't possible," she responds, injecting desperate pleading into her voice. "I need time to pack my belongings, to find somewhere." "Tomorrow." Hawkins cuts her off, stepping even closer. A physical intimidation tactic that might terrify a genuine civilian, but merely provides Eleanor with additional tactical advantages should she need them. Or Fletcher won't be the only one experiencing unfortunate accidents. He gestures to Monroe, who produces a red notice similar to the one attached to her gate the previous day, an official condemnation order bearing Judge Matthews's signature. "Post it," Hawkins commands, his eyes never leaving Eleanor's face as he searches for the fear he expects to find there. Eleanor maintains her vulnerable widow persona while mentally documenting every aspect of this encounter, the forged documents indicating coordination with corrupt officials, the escalation to direct physical threats, the timeline compression suggesting urgency beyond normal business acquisition. "Please," she begs, her performance flawless despite the tactical calculations continuing behind her frightened expression. "I need more time." "Time's up, Mrs. Blackwood," Hawkins responds with cold finality. "Whistling Creek belongs to the future. Now, either profit from progress or become its casualty." As the raiders depart, Eleanor allows herself exactly 30 seconds of visible distress, enough to maintain her cover should they be watching from a distance. Then her expression transforms, civilian vulnerability replaced by military focus. As she retrieves Timothy from the cellar, "They're accelerating everything," she informs the boy, as she pens quick messages to her resistance network. "Which means something's forcing their hand." Timothy absorbs this with surprising composure. "What are you going to do?" Eleanor seals the messages, addressing each to different members of their growing resistance. "Counter their timeline with our own. We cannot wait any longer." She dispatches Timothy through the hidden tunnel with instructions to deliver the sealed notes to Martha's clinic, where they'll be distributed by her assistants throughout the resistance network. Once alone, Eleanor moves to her bedroom, pulling aside the hand-woven rug to reveal a concealed trapdoor. The underground space contains items she'd hoped never to use again. Specialized equipment from her cavalry days, maintained in perfect condition despite years of disuse. The false-bottomed trunk yields her field kit, a specialized officer's case containing map tools, cipher materials, and tactical references. Beneath that lies the modified Spencer carbine, custom ammunition, and the cavalry officer's uniform she'd preserved as her only connection to a life she thought left behind. Eleanor doesn't touch the uniform, but her fingers trace the carbine's barrel with familiar precision. For years, this weapon had been an extension of herself, the tool that made her the Union Army's most effective cavalry sharpshooter. Now it represents a line she hoped never to cross again, the transition from civilian resistance to armed response. "Not yet," she murmurs, closing the case without removing the weapon. But soon. Instead, she selects the tactical field kit and cipher materials. The Scarlet Raiders have accelerated their timeline, compressing what should have been weeks of gradual acquisition into days of forced compliance. Such urgency suggests external pressure, a development that creates both danger and opportunity for her resistance network. Eleanor returns to the kitchen just as Samuel arrives through the back entrance, his expression grim. "Town's crawling with new raiders," he reports without preamble. "At least 15 more arrived overnight. They're posting red notices on every strategic property. Sheriff Hollister's openly riding with them now, showing Judge Matthews' condemnation. Orders to anyone who questions their authority." "They've abandoned subtlety," Eleanor observes, spreading her map across the table. "Which means their primary operation is imminent." Samuel places a folded paper before her, a telegraph transcript. obtained from his contact at the communications office. Shipment arriving in Carson City tomorrow, Eleanor reads, decoding the apparently innocent commercial message. Final transport preparations accelerated. Clear Valley access routes by nightfall. The implications crystallize with military clarity. They're moving something valuable through the valley tomorrow night, something that requires complete territorial control before arrival. Which explains the sudden acceleration, Samuel concludes. Whatever they're transporting, the timeline got moved up, creating vulnerability we can exploit, Eleanor notes, already calculating how to adjust their resistance strategy. Their haste will force mistakes. A sharp knock at the back door interrupts their planning. Samuel checks through the concealed viewing port before admitting Martha Collins, her medical bag clutched tightly in white-knuckled hands. They've taken over the clinic, she announces without preamble, her professional composure cracking slightly. Hawkins and 6 men said they're securing medical resources for upcoming railroad operations, ordered me to prepare for potential casualties tomorrow night. Eleanor processes this development with tactical efficiency. They're expecting resistance, preparing for confrontation. Fletcher wasn't their only warning example, Martha continues, opening her medical bag to reveal blood-stained bandages. They broke McIntyre's apprentice's leg when he questioned their authority to search the smithy. 2 of Harrison's customers were beaten in the street for interfering with official business. Classic escalation pattern, Eleanor observes, her voice carrying the analytical tone of a military officer rather than civilian outrage. Demonstrating consequences of resistance before their main operation commences. Reverend Walsh tried to intervene, Martha adds grimly. They locked him in the church basement, said he'll be released after crucial transportation activities are completed. Samuel checks the window before speaking. They're creating a climate of terror, ensuring no one interferes tomorrow night, while simultaneously revealing the timing of their critical operation. Eleanor notes, already adapting their strategy to this new intelligence. A tactical error we can exploit. Martha opens a hidden compartment in her medical bag, removing a folded document sealed with wax. My contact at Fort Sterling sent this. Federal Marshal Roberts will be in Carson City tomorrow on unrelated business. If we can get him evidence of criminal conspiracy involving corrupt officials, he has the authority to intervene immediately. Eleanor examines the document, official authorization for federal intervention upon presentation of evidence indicating criminal corruption of local government. A potential solution that bypasses the compromised Sheriff Hollister and Judge Matthews. The question is, what they're moving through the valley that requires such extreme measures, Samuel observes. Eleanor consults the map, connecting intelligence fragments into a coherent tactical picture. Railroad construction requires blasting, powder. Mining operations need specialized equipment. Both have been disappearing between San Francisco and their destinations. Weapons, Martha suggests. During the war, medical supplies often traveled with arms shipments. All possibilities, Eleanor acknowledges. But whatever it is, it's valuable enough to risk exposing their entire operation through these accelerated intimidation tactics. She traces the northern route through Whistling Creek Valley, finger-stopping at the abandoned Fletcher property the raiders have converted to their headquarters. Their shipment needs to pass through here tomorrow night, which means we need evidence of their operation, their cargo, and their corrupt official support, all documented and in Marshal Roberts' hands by tomorrow afternoon. Impossible, Samuel responds automatically. Carson City's a full day's ride. The valley exits are all watched. Eleanor's expression shifts subtly, civilian determination giving way to the calculated focus of a combat veteran planning an operation. Not all exits, she corrects, indicating a narrow mountain pass on the western ridge, a route so treacherous it doesn't appear on conventional maps. Not for someone who once led cavalry scouts through Confederate territory. Martha studies the proposed route with medical concern. That pass is suicide in darkness, sheer drops, unstable footing. Precisely why they won't be watching it. Eleanor finishes. I'll leave tonight with the evidence we've already gathered. By dawn, I can reach the Western Postal Relay. From there, an express courier can have our documentation in Carson City by midday. And the additional evidence? Samuel questions. We still don't know exactly what they're transporting. Eleanor moves to the window, studying the distant Fletcher property through her field glasses. That's tonight's secondary mission. While they believe I'm cowering in fear of tomorrow's deadline, I'll document exactly what they're preparing at their headquarters. Alone. Martha's medical training surfaces as a professional concern. Against their entire force, they've consolidated. Most forces in town to maintain control, Eleanor responds with tactical precision. The Fletcher property will have minimal security. They're not expecting anyone to approach their headquarters while they're creating terror throughout the valley. She turns from the window, her demeanor fully transformed now. The widow's gentle uncertainty replaced by a cavalry officer's decisive command presence. Samuel, prepare the mountain equipment in the north shed. Martha, I need specific medical supplies for a night operation. Her instructions flow with practiced authority. We move when darkness provides maximum cover. As they depart to execute her orders, Eleanor returns to the hidden compartment beneath her bedroom floor. This time, she removes the Spencer carbine, checking its action with professional efficiency. The weapon represents the final line she'd hoped never to cross, the transition from passive resistance to active countermeasures. The Scarlet Raiders have forced her hand by threatening her community, by hurting people under her protection. Whatever their operation involves, whatever passes through Whistling Creek Valley tomorrow night, Eleanor Blackwood, Lieutenant Blackwood, will ensure it faces the justice it deserves. The widow's mourning clothes lie discarded on the bed as she dons the practical riding outfit hidden beneath them, garments designed for movement, for concealment, for operation in hostile territory. The cavalry officer emerges from civilian cover, 7 years of peaceful existence giving way to the tactical precision that once made her the most effective scout in the Union Army. By tomorrow night, the Scarlet Raiders will learn why some of the West's most dangerous targets never even heard the shot that took them down. Dusk settles over Whistling Creek Valley as Eleanor makes her final preparations. The specialized night operation kit she hasn't touched since the war lies spread across the kitchen table. Darkened riding clothes, wire cutters disguised as gardening tools, copper-bottomed boots designed to minimize sound, and a customized signal mirror for communication across distances without light. The mountain passage will be treacherous even for an experienced rider, Samuel cautions as he checks the specialized saddle modifications on Eleanor's most sure-footed mare, especially carrying intelligence documents. Which is precisely why. It's our best option, Eleanor responds, applying lamp black to exposed metal parts of her equipment. They'll expect attempted communication through conventional routes. The Western Passage won't be watched. Martha arrives through the back entrance, a medical bag containing supplies specifically selected for the night mission, stimulants to maintain alertness, bandages designed for field application, and specialized salve for treating rope burns or abrasions that might occur during climbing. Fletcher reports increased raider presence throughout town, she informs them, arranging the medical supplies in Eleanor's field pack. They've established checkpoints on all major roads. Full territorial control is nearly complete. And the clinic? Eleanor inquires, knowing Martha's medical hub represents a critical intelligence node. 4 raiders maintaining constant presence, Martha confirms grimly. They're reviewing patient records, tracking medical supply inventories, clearly searching for something specific, or someone, Eleanor suggests, securing the intelligence packet inside a waterproof pouch. Their operational timeline suggests they fear interference. They're looking for potential resistance. Samuel returns from his perimeter check, expression troubled. Two riders watching the main approach, another on the eastern ridge with field glasses. Eleanor nods, unsurprised by the surveillance. Good. Let them watch expected approaches while we use the routes they don't know exist. As darkness deepens, she completes her transformation from widow to operative. Hair secured beneath a dark cap, face subtly darkened with ash to prevent light reflection. Movements shifting from civilian openness to the controlled efficiency of a cavalry scout. If I'm not back by dawn, implement the contingency plan, she instructs, her voice carrying the quiet authority that once commanded elite cavalry units. Martha's clinic becomes command center. Samuel coordinates the message network. Evidence. Packets reach Marshal Roberts through the alternate courier chain. Samuel and Martha exchange concerned glances, but recognize the operational necessity. They've witnessed Eleanor's gradual transformation over the past days, the peaceful orchard owner receding as the military officer emerges with increasing clarity. The raiders still think I'm a frightened widow cowering in my home, Eleanor continues, checking sightlines through the darkened windows. That misconception gives us our first tactical advantage. She provides final instructions, communication, protocols, fallback positions, response options if raider aggression escalates before her return. Then Eleanor Blackwood, former lieutenant of the Union Cavalry's elite Shadowhawk scouts, disappears into the darkness through a concealed exit beneath the root cellar. The underground passage, originally constructed as a storage cellar extension, emerges in a dense apple grove 300 yards from the main house. From this position, Eleanor confirms the raiders' surveillance pattern before moving toward the western ridge, using natural features for concealment. Her body remembers combat movement patterns with surprising clarity. The careful weight distribution that minimizes sound, the measured breathing that maintains stamina while allowing for acute environmental awareness, the disciplined sensory scanning that identifies threats before they materialize. The western passage awaits. A narrow game, trail ascending through treacherous terrain toward the ridgeline. By conventional assessment, it's impassable in darkness. But Eleanor's specialized training with the Shadowhawks included night navigation through enemy territory, where conventional paths meant certain detection. She ascends with methodical precision, each handhold tested before committing weight, each footfall placed with calculated care. The intelligence packet secured against her body contains the resistance network's documented evidence, property seizure patterns, forged legal documents, witness testimonies of intimidation and violence, maps indicating the raiders' systematic control of transportation routes. If this information reaches Marshal Roberts by tomorrow's deadline, federal intervention becomes possible. If not, Whistling Creek Valley faces complete subjugation under criminal control. 2 hours of careful climbing brings Eleanor to a natural observation point overlooking the valley's northern section. From this elevation, she can observe the abandoned Fletcher property the raiders have converted to their headquarters. The main house glows with lamplight, while outbuildings show signs of significant modification, new construction, reinforced doors, expanded storage facilities. Through field glasses, Eleanor catalogues operational details invisible from ground level, sentry positions revealing gaps in their security perimeter, supply wagons suggesting logistical preparations, weapons caches indicating military-grade armaments rather than typical outlaw equipment. Most significantly, she identifies construction activity around the old mining shed, a structure being systematically reinforced with additional timbers, its entrance widened to accommodate large cargo. Workers toil by lantern light, their urgency evident even from this distance. Preparing for tomorrow's shipment, she murmurs, documenting the observed activity in her field notebook with precise, tactical notations. Eleanor continues westward along the ridge, moving with increased caution as the trail narrows dangerously. A misstep here means certain death, a fact that ensures the raiders consider this route unusable, particularly in darkness. Reaching the designated observation point above the main north-south valley route, she settles into position, field glasses, trained on the distant crossroads where the shipment must pass tomorrow night. The raiders have established a checkpoint there, ostensibly a construction camp, but Eleanor recognizes the tactical positioning that allows them to control all conventional traffic. What she observes next confirms their operation extends far beyond simple land acquisition. A private stagecoach approaches from the north, an unusual sight at this hour, particularly on a route supposedly closed for railroad survey work. The coach stops at the checkpoint, where Hawkins himself emerges. From the guard post, a well-dressed man disembarks, his attire and bearing suggesting Eastern wealth rather than frontier practicality. Even from this distance, Eleanor recognizes the implicit authority in his stance, the way the raiders defer to his presence despite their usual arrogance. The real authority, she notes in her field journal, sketching the man's distinctive appearance with practiced precision. Civilian clothes, military bearing, financier, not field operative. The visitor inspects the checkpoint with obvious dissatisfaction, gesturing emphatically toward the southern road while consulting a pocket watch. Though too distant to hear the conversation, Eleanor reads the body language with experienced clarity. This man is displeased with the operation's progress, demanding explanations for delays. After 20 minutes, the visitor returns to his coach, departing northward with obvious haste. Hawkins immediately dispatches riders in multiple directions, orders being distributed with renewed urgency. Timeline acceleration confirmed, Eleanor documents. External pressure from operational command. She continues her westward traverse, reaching the critical junction where the narrow game trail connects to the hunting path that eventually leads to Carson City. This route, unmarked on conventional maps and considered impassable by local standards, represents her only chance to deliver the intelligence packet before tomorrow's deadline. Eleanor secures her equipment for the dangerous descent, calculating time against distance with military precision. If she maintains optimal pace through the night, the Western Postal Relay Station can be reached by early morning. From there, an express courier could deliver the evidence packet to Marshal Roberts in Carson City by midday. Before beginning her descent, Eleanor conducts one final observation sweep of the valley below. The raiders' activities have intensified, more. Riders moving between town and their headquarters. Increased security at key junctions, preparations that suggest imminent operational escalation. Something catches her attention near the eastern approach to their headquarters. A flash of movement. In the tree line where no sentry position should exist. Through field glasses, she identifies a lone figure approaching the perimeter with incongruous stealth for someone aligned with the raiders. The figure's movement pattern triggers immediate recognition. Timothy Fletcher, the miller's son, attempting amateur surveillance of his family's seized property. The boy's courage is admirable, but tactically disastrous. He's minutes away from discovery by perimeter guards. Eleanor faces an immediate operational dilemma. Her primary mission, delivering critical intelligence to Marshal Roberts, requires continuing westward immediately. Deviating to extract Timothy means certain mission compromise, potentially sacrificing the entire valley for one child's safety. Military logic dictates clear priority. The intelligence packet must reach Carson City to save hundreds of citizens from criminal subjugation. A commanding officer would maintain mission focus regardless of individual risk. But Eleanor Blackwood didn't leave the war unchanged. The calculus that once seemed so clear, sacrificing individuals for strategic objectives, no longer computes. Without consideration of human cost, tactical adjustment required, she notes in her field journal, already plotting an alternate approach that might achieve both objectives. Eleanor secures the intelligence packet in a waterproof container, anchoring it at the trail marker with specific positioning that Samuel would recognize if contingency protocols activate. Then she begins a rapid descent using a different route, one leading directly to the eastern perimeter of the raiders' headquarters. Time works against her now. Timothy's amateur infiltration has already brought him dangerously close to sentry positions. The boy's determination is evident in his deliberate movements. He's searching for something specific, likely evidence of his father's property being misused. Eleanor navigates the treacherous terrain with practiced efficiency, each movement calculated to maximize speed while minimizing detection risk. 15 minutes of controlled descent brings her within operational range of Timothy's position. The boy has stopped behind a woodpile, observing raiders unloading crates from a wagon. Even from this distance, Eleanor recognizes the container markings, U.S. Army munitions, almost certainly stolen from military shipments. The theft of government property explains federal interest, confirming this operation extends far beyond local criminal activity. A sentry's movement pattern shifts. He's detected something near Timothy's position. The guard adjusts his patrol route, unconsciously demonstrating basic military training as he investigates the potential disturbance. Eleanor calculates trajectories and timing with combat precision. Direct intervention would compromise both Timothy and herself. Instead, she implements wilderness distraction techniques developed during Confederate territory infiltrations. A carefully thrown stone creates noise in the opposite direction. The sentry responds predictably, attention diverted toward the apparent disturbance. Eleanor utilizes the momentary advantage to close distance with Timothy, approaching from his blind side with perfect stealth. The boy nearly cries out when her hand covers his mouth, but recognition dawns quickly as she guides him into deeper shadow. "Lieutenant Blackwood," he whispers, using the military title Samuel had apparently shared despite operational security protocols. "They have Pa's milling equipment. They're using it to process something from those crates." Eleanor signals for silence, guiding Timothy toward an extraction route she's identified through gaps in the raiders' perimeter security. The boy's intelligence confirms another piece of the operational puzzle. The mill equipment's specialized functions being repurposed for the mysterious shipment arriving tomorrow. They move through darkness with shared purpose, Eleanor adjusting her pace to accommodate Timothy's civilian limitations while maintaining tactical awareness of pursuing threats. The sentries have discovered the boy's infiltration point, raising general alert throughout the perimeter. "Search pattern Alpha," she recognizes in their deployment, further confirming military training underlying the raiders' operations. Amateur execution. Eleanor guides Timothy through a dry creek bed, providing both concealment and minimal sound. Transmission. The boy demonstrates surprising adaptability, mirroring her movement techniques with natural aptitude. "They took Pa's grain separator," Timothy whispers, during a momentary pause to assess pursuit patterns. "It's designed for sorting different sizes. They're using it with whatever's in those army crates." Eleanor processes this information against her expanding tactical assessment. Grain separators sort material by size and weight, a function that could serve multiple illicit purposes, from processing stolen gold to separating ammunition components. "Did you see what they're separating?" she asks, calculating their next movement against pursuit vectors. "Yellow powder," Timothy confirms. "They're extracting it from larger material in the crates, storing it in special containers with government markings." The information completes another section of the operational picture. Yellow powder extracted from military shipments suggests blasting materials, high-grade explosives being separated from standard ammunition supplies, likely for sale to mining operations at premium prices. Their escape continues through increasingly challenging terrain, the raiders' pursuit gradually falling behind as Eleanor's superior knowledge of wilderness movement creates tactical advantage. By midnight, they've reached sufficient distance for relative security. "We need to reach town," Timothy insists once they pause on safe ground. "Tell Sheriff Hollister about the stolen army property." "Sheriff Hollister is working with them," Eleanor explains, assessing their position against available routes. As is Judge Matthews. Local law enforcement has been compromised. Timothy absorbs this with the adaptability of youth. "Then we fight them ourselves." "Not without proper authority," Eleanor responds, making a critical tactical decision. "You've provided valuable intelligence about their operation. Information that must reach federal authorities immediately." She produces a small leather case containing paper, pencil, and seal wax. With military efficiency, Eleanor documents Timothy's observations, adding the intelligence to her original packet with precise notations clarifying the chain of evidence. "I need you to take this to Samuel," she instructs, securing the waterproof packet. "He knows alternate routes to Carson City. Tell him Shadowhawk protocol activated. He'll understand." Timothy accepts the packet with obvious pride in being entrusted with such responsibility. "What about you? You're coming back to town, right?" Eleanor studies the distant raiders' headquarters, calculating options with tactical precision. "Their security has been compromised by your discovery. They'll accelerate preparations for tomorrow's shipment, potentially relocating key components." You're going back there," Timothy realizes with surprising insight, "to gather more evidence. What you've discovered changes operational parameters," Eleanor confirms. "We now know they're processing stolen military explosives, a federal crime that justifies immediate intervention if properly documented." She provides Timothy with precise instructions for reaching Samuel through concealed routes, emergency protocols if captured, and recognition signals to identify friendly contacts. The boy absorbs these with remarkable focus, his natural intelligence, adapting to combat communication requirements. "Lieutenant Blackwood," Timothy asks as they prepare to separate, "were you really in the war? Samuel says you were the best scout in the Union Army." Eleanor pauses, memories surfacing of operations long buried beneath her civilian identity. "I served," she acknowledges simply, "as did many others." "Pa says the war changed everything," Timothy continues, adjusting the precious intelligence packet inside his jacket. "Says some folks never really came home, even when they were standing right in front of you." The insight, surprising from one so young, momentarily penetrates Eleanor's operational focus. For 7 years, she's maintained her widow's identity, suppressing the cavalry officer whose decisions sent men to their deaths, whose precision with a Spencer carbine earned her both commendations and nightmares. "Your father is a wise man," she responds finally. "Now go. Samuel will be waiting at the rendezvous point." They separate, Timothy moving northeast toward town through concealed routes, Eleanor returning northwest toward the raiders' headquarters. With renewed operational purpose, the intelligence Timothy provided transforms their resistance strategy from defensive documentation to active counterintelligence. Stolen military explosives being processed through appropriated civilian equipment explains the raiders' accelerated timeline, their willingness to risk exposure through increasingly aggressive tactics. Whatever arrives tomorrow night involves significant quantities of illegally obtained blasting materials, supplies worth enough to justify territorial control of an entire valley. Eleanor approaches the perimeter with enhanced caution, noting increased sentry activity following Timothy's discovered infiltration. Their response pattern confirms amateur military training, increased vigilance in previously compromised sectors, while actually reducing coverage of alternate approaches. She utilizes this tactical error to access an observation position overlooking the main processing facility. Through field glasses, Eleanor documents crucial evidence: government property markings clearly visible on opened crates, military-grade explosives being extracted through misappropriated milling equipment, quantities suggesting industrial scale, operation rather than localized criminal activity. Most significantly, she observes preparation for much larger shipments, storage facilities being expanded, processing stations multiplied, handling equipment modified for increased volume. Whatever arrives tomorrow represents just the beginning of a major operation. Eleanor documents everything with precision born of military intelligence training: detailed sketches, quantity estimates, personnel identifications, operational timelines. Evidence that, combined with Timothy's first-hand observations, would justify immediate federal intervention. As she prepares to extract from her observation position, a familiar figure emerges from the main building. Quinn, the young raider with former military bearing. He approaches the processing facility with visible reluctance, his body language suggesting growing discomfort with the operation. Through enhanced optics, Eleanor observes his conversation with the processing crew, tension evident as he questions certain procedures. Though too distant to hear specific words, she recognizes the posture of a soldier, raising concerns about operational parameters, about boundaries being crossed. Quinn's unease represents potential operational advantage, a fracture line within the Raiders' organization that might be exploited. Eleanor documents this observation with particular attention to potential asset development opportunities. Her extraction proceeds with textbook precision, utilizing the Raiders' predictable patrol patterns to navigate through their security perimeter. By the time she reaches safe territory, Eleanor has compiled comprehensive documentation of criminal operations involving stolen government property, evidence that transforms local intimidation into federal conspiracy. The question remains whether Timothy successfully delivered the intelligence packet to Samuel, whether the Carson City route remains viable for reaching Marshal Roberts before tomorrow's deadline. Eleanor checks her pocket watch against the eastern horizon. 4 hours until dawn, perhaps 6, before the mysterious shipment begins its journey toward Whistling Creek Valley. She sets her course toward town, calculating optimal routes against known raider checkpoint positions. The cavalry officer has fully emerged now, Lieutenant Blackwood operationalizing tactical parameters with cold precision, the widow's civilian identity temporarily set aside in service to mission requirements. Tomorrow, the Scarlet Raiders will face something they never anticipated when selecting Whistling Creek Valley for their criminal enterprise: a former military intelligence officer with specialized training in asymmetric response to superior forces. A sharpshooter whose peaceful retirement ends the moment threats target those under her protection. First light breaks over Whistling Creek as Eleanor approaches town through concealed routes, avoiding the raiders' checkpoints with practiced efficiency. The settlement appears unnaturally quiet, streets empty of the usual morning activity, businesses closed despite the hour, an atmosphere of submission hanging over the community like morning fog. Through field glasses, she observes increased raider presence, armed men positioned at strategic intersections, patrols moving with military formation between critical buildings, citizens hurrying about necessary business with downcast eyes and furtive movements. Territorial control established, she notes mentally, recognizing the pattern from occupied towns during the war. Civilian compliance through visible intimidation. Eleanor accesses Martha's clinic through the concealed entrance they'd established. In the root cellar, a narrow passage connecting to the medical storage area. Inside, she finds not just Martha, but Samuel, McIntyre, and Clara, gathered in tense consultation. "Timothy reached us with the intelligence packet," Samuel reports. "Immediately, exhausted but unharmed, the boy showed remarkable courage." Martha looks up from rebinding a fresh wound on McIntyre's forearm. "The situation deteriorated overnight. Raiders implemented martial restrictions, curfew, travel permits, business closures. Anyone questioning their authority faces immediate correction." The blacksmith's injury provides visceral evidence of this policy, a defensive wound sustained while protecting his apprentice from further raider aggression. "They're securing the entire valley before their shipment arrives," Eleanor observes, accepting water from Clara while mentally processing these developments against her operational timeline. Creating total territorial control to ensure smooth passage. "Timothy's intelligence about stolen military explosives explains their urgency," Samuel adds. "Federal crimes justify immediate intervention if Marshal Roberts receives our evidence. The critical question hangs unspoken between them, whether their intelligence packet can reach Carson City before the shipment arrives tonight." Eleanor addresses this directly. As the courier departed with our documentation, Samuel's expression confirms the operational setback before his words. "Raiders established checkpoints on all known routes to Carson City, including the Western Passage. You reconnoitered." "Fletcher attempted to break through with the packet, but was intercepted returning to town." "Fletcher's alive," Martha clarifies quickly, seeing Eleanor's expression harden. "Under guard at his seized mill. They're using him to process more of the yellow powder Timothy identified." Eleanor absorbs this intelligence with military efficiency, recalculating options against increasing constraints. "And Timothy's observations? The evidence packet." "Secure," Clara responds, indicating a concealed compartment beneath a medicine cabinet. "Fletcher didn't carry it. We maintained operational security as you instructed." Eleanor acknowledges this with subtle approval, her makeshift resistance cell learning proper intelligence protocols despite their civilian backgrounds. Their adaptability reinforces her conviction that Whistling Creek can be saved from criminal subjugation. "What about Reverend Walsh?" she inquires, noting his absence from their gathering. "Still detained in the church basement," McIntyre reports grimly. "Raiders are using the building as a holding facility for anyone who resists their official directives. At least 6 townspeople have been imprisoned there since last night." "Including Judge Matthews," Martha adds, with significant emphasis. Apparently his usefulness ended once they had his signature on their forged documents. He objected to something, perhaps learning the true nature of what he'd authorized, and found himself joining those he'd helped condemn. This development represents both challenge and opportunity. Matthews possessed direct knowledge of the raiders' corruption of legal processes, valuable testimony that could strengthen their case for federal intervention. His detention suggests internal conflicts within the criminal hierarchy. "Do we have any route remaining to reach Marshal Roberts?" Eleanor asks, focusing on their most critical operational requirement. "Possibly," Samuel responds, spreading a modified map across Martha's examination table. "Raiders control all conventional approaches, but they've concentrated forces on northern routes where their shipment will arrive. The southern marsh passage remains lightly guarded. They consider it impassable." Eleanor studies the proposed route with tactical assessment. The southern marsh represented treacherous terrain, quicksand pockets, disorienting fog banks, trails that disappeared beneath waterlogged ground, only to emerge miles from their expected position. During the war, similar terrain features had proven both deadly obstacles and effective concealment, depending on one's familiarity with their specific characteristics. "Do we have anyone who knows that route intimately?" she inquires, recognizing that local knowledge would prove essential for such hazardous navigation. McIntyre nods toward Clara. "Harrison's father was a trapper, worked those marshes for 30 years before passing. Clara accompanied him since childhood, knows the safe. Passage is better than anyone living. Eleanor turns to the shopkeeper, reassessing the quiet woman's capabilities. Clara Harrison had demonstrated intelligence-gathering skills through her meticulous documentation of raider activities. This new information suggested additional operational value. Could you guide someone through the marsh to the Southern Postal Station? Eleanor asks directly. Before nightfall. Clara considers this with practical assessment rather than bravado. Yes, 3 hours through the marshland, if we leave within the hour. The morning fog provides additional concealment until midday, and return by the same route tonight. Eleanor presses, already formulating the next phase of their response strategy. Possible, Clara confirms with the confidence of genuine expertise. But only with proper equipment and someone physically capable of keeping pace. Eleanor makes her decision with military efficiency. Samuel will accompany you with the intelligence packet. His cavalry experience provides necessary endurance, while your pathfinding ensures optimal route selection. She turns to Martha and McIntyre. Meanwhile, we must prepare for contingencies should federal intervention not arrive before tonight's shipment. The raiders have accelerated their timeline, but haste creates vulnerabilities we can exploit. McIntyre produces several items from his leather apron, metal components that, while appearing innocuous individually, Eleanor immediately recognizes as disassembled parts of mechanical delay triggers. Been working on these since you first identified the threat, the blacksmith explains, modified from mill equipment timing mechanisms. Perfectly innocent agricultural tools that happen to function effectively as remote disruption devices. Eleanor examines the craftsmanship with professional appreciation. During the war, similar field expedient devices had proven effective in delaying enemy supply movements without direct confrontation. These, positioned at key junctures, could create sufficient chaos to disrupt their shipment, she observes, mentally mapping potential placement locations against the raiders' likely route through the valley. Precisely, McIntyre confirms with professional pride. Mechanical failures are indistinguishable from accidents, delays rather than destruction, buying time without direct confrontation, and creating distraction while we implement additional countermeasures, Eleanor adds, her tactical planning shifting to incorporate these new resources. Clara and Samuel prepare for their marsh expedition, gathering specialized equipment from Martha's medical supplies, waterproofed containers for the evidence packet, stimulants to maintain alertness through difficult terrain, salves to prevent exposure damage from prolonged water contact. Eleanor provides final instructions, communication protocols, delivery requirements for Marshal Roberts, contingency procedures if interception seems imminent. Her operational commands flow with natural authority, the cavalry officer fully emerging from behind the widow's civilian facade. Remember, she concludes, as they prepare to depart through the concealed exit, timing is crucial. Marshal Roberts must receive our evidence with sufficient hours to mobilize federal response before the shipment reaches Whistling Creek tonight. After they've departed, Eleanor turns to Martha and McIntyre with renewed focus. Now we prepare our contingency. Response should federal intervention not arrive in time. She spreads her tactical map across the examination table, identifying key positions throughout the valley. The raiders believe they've established complete territorial control. This overconfidence creates exploitable blind spots in their security perimeter. Eleanor marks specific locations where McIntyre's delay mechanisms could be positioned for maximum effectiveness. Primary objective: disrupt their shipment movement without revealing our direct involvement. Secondary objective: document specific evidence of federal crimes being committed, strengthening post-operation prosecution. And if direct confrontation becomes necessary, Martha asks, her medical background naturally focusing on potential casualties. We avoid it at all costs, Eleanor responds firmly. We're not staging a military engagement. We're creating targeted disruption of criminal activity until proper authorities can intervene. Their planning continues with methodical precision, each contingency addressed with carefully calibrated responses. Eleanor notes with professional approval how quickly her civilian resistance cell adapts to tactical thinking. Martha's medical expertise translated to casualty prevention protocols, McIntyre's engineering knowledge applied to terrain modification strategies. Their session is interrupted by a coded knock at the back entrance, 3 quick taps followed by 2 slower ones. Martha admits young Abigail Harrison, Clara's daughter, who enters with urgent intelligence. Raiders are searching every building in town, she reports breathlessly, going room by room with written lists, looking for specific people. Lists? Eleanor inquires, immediately recognizing the significance. Did you see any names? Abigail nods, her observational skills clearly inherited from her mother. Yours was at the top, Mrs. Blackwood. Then Dr. Collins, Mr. McIntyre, Mr. Williams, Ma, and Reverend Walsh. They're calling you primary instigators of resistance to progress. Eleanor processes this development with tactical assessment. The raiders had identified their resistance network's core membership, transitioning from general intimidation to targeted neutralization. Their operational security had been compromised. They're eliminating potential opposition before their shipment arrives, she concludes. Standard procedure before major illegal operations: remove anyone capable of organized resistance. Quinn is leading the search parties, Abigail continues, demonstrating remarkable detail retention despite her youth. But he seems reluctant. I heard him arguing with Monroe about searching the clinic, said sick people shouldn't be disturbed. This confirms Eleanor's previous assessment of Quinn as a potential fracture point within the Raider organization, a man following orders with increasing moral reservation. Such internal conflict could provide operational advantage if properly leveraged. How close are the search parties to this location? Eleanor asks, already calculating extraction options. 2 buildings away and moving methodically, Abigail reports. Checking attics, cellars, storage rooms. They'll reach the clinic within 30 minutes at their current pace. Martha moves immediately to conceal their tactical materials, while McIntyre secures his disruption devices in a false-bottom medical supply crate. Eleanor makes quick decisions based on operational necessity. Martha remains here. Her absence would immediately trigger suspicion. McIntyre uses the concealed passage to reach his smithy before the raiders complete their current search section. I'll create a diversion drawing attention away from the clinic. What kind of diversion? Martha asks with professional concern. Eleanor's expression shifts subtly, the cavalry officer's calculated precision fully evident. The kind that exploits their expectation of finding a frightened widow rather than a combat veteran. The kind that redirects their search parameters away from our actual resistance network. She outlines her strategy with military efficiency. A controlled appearance at her orchard, drawing raider attention toward an apparently panicked civilian. Attempting to flee with personal possessions, creating pursuit vectors that pull search resources away from town. A deliberate tactical sacrifice, McIntyre recognizes with the soldier's understanding, drawing fire to protect the unit. A calculated risk, Eleanor corrects, one that serves multiple objectives simultaneously. Their search pattern focuses on finding resistance leadership in hiding. Finding me apparently fleeing disrupts that operational assumption. Martha understands the implications immediately. You're hiding in plain sight, making them believe they've successfully intimidated you into running. Precisely, Eleanor confirms, while simultaneously positioning myself to implement our contingency measures should federal intervention not arrive in time. She provides final instructions, communication protocols through Martha's medical courier network, time frames for McIntyre's disruption device placement, coordination signals for potential resistance activity tonight. Every detail addressed with the precision of a military operation order. If I am detained during this maneuver, she concludes with pragmatic acceptance of operational risk, continue implementation of our strategy. Samuel knows secondary protocols if he returns from Carson City to find leadership compromised. Eleanor departs through the concealed passage, moving with professional efficiency despite lingering exhaustion from her night mission. The morning fog provides additional concealment as she navigates between buildings, avoiding raider search parties. Through practiced stealth techniques, reaching the town's eastern boundary, she observes raider deployment patterns with critical assessment. Their search operations demonstrate increasing professionalism, systematic building clearance, coordinated communications, overlapping fields of observation. Someone with actual military experience has taken operational control, improving their previously amateur execution. Eleanor modifies her approach accordingly, utilizing terrain features the raiders' perimeter security overlooks. Their focus on buildings leaves natural concealment along creek beds insufficiently monitored. She exploits this tactical error to bypass their checkpoints, reaching the orchard through indirect approach vectors. The property appears undisturbed. No obvious signs of raider presence since her departure the previous evening. This operational oversight confirms their focus remains on town rather than outlying properties, another vulnerability she can exploit. Inside the main house, Eleanor implements the next phase of her diversion strategy. She selects a travel bag, filling it with conspicuous personal items visible from outside, clothing, photographs, valuables. Movement patterns are deliberately hurried, projecting the panicked anxiety of a civilian preparing desperate flight. Through periodic window checks, she confirms radar observation has resumed. 2 riders positioned at the eastern ridge, field glasses trained on the main house. Her performance registers with her intended audience, creating the intelligence they expect to find. A frightened widow attempting escape before the raiders' deadline. Eleanor prepares her equipment with methodical efficiency beneath this theatrical display. Field kit concealed beneath civilian clothing, tactical tools disguised as household items. The Spencer carbine disassembled and hidden within mundane luggage compartments. Everything arranged for rapid deployment when operational parameters require transition from diversion to direct action. By mid-morning, raider response materializes as anticipated. 4 riders approaching from town, Hawkins himself leading their formation. Their urgency suggests her diversion has successfully drawn attention from the town searches, potentially creating the operational window Samuel and Clara need to reach the southern postal station. Eleanor allows herself to be discovered, loading her wagon, her performance calibrated to project civilian fear rather than military calculation. She fumbles with packages, drops items when the raiders approach, displays the disorganized panic expected from a civilian under threat. "Going somewhere, Mrs. Blackwood?" Hawkins calls as they surround her wagon. "I believe our deadline hasn't quite arrived yet. I just need more time," Eleanor responds, injecting desperate pleading into her voice while her mind calculates distances, angles, and response options with combat precision. Just a few days to find somewhere else. Afraid that's not possible. Hawkins responds with false regret. "In fact, our timeline has actually accelerated. The property transfer happens today, right now." Eleanor notes significant changes in the raiders' operational profile since yesterday. Increased weaponry, professional tactical positioning, communication equipment suggesting coordination with additional forces. Their operational security has tightened considerably, indicating imminent activity related to tonight's shipment. "Please," she begs, maintaining her frightened widow persona while gathering tactical intelligence from their equipment, formation, and communication patterns. "Everything I have is here?" "Your reluctance has complicated matters," Hawkins responds, his previous false courtesy replaced by open menace. "We've identified you as a primary instigator of community resistance. Your influence has made our work considerably more difficult." Eleanor allows genuine surprise to show on her face, not at being identified as resistance leadership, but at Hawkins correctly assessing her actual role rather than accepting her civilian facade. Someone has provided him with more accurate intelligence than the raiders had previously demonstrated capacity to gather. "I don't know what you mean," she protests, watching as Monroe and another raider begin searching her house with methodical precision. Not the haphazard intimidation tactics previously employed, but professional room-clearing procedures indicating enhanced operational capabilities. "I think you do," Hawkins responds, producing a folded paper from inside his coat. This list of community concerns circulating among local businesses bears remarkable similarity to military intelligence briefing formats, quite sophisticated for simple farmers and shopkeepers. He studies her with a new assessment, the dismissive underestimation replaced by wary recalculation, almost as if someone with professional experience was coordinating their activities. The tactical situation has shifted dramatically. Eleanor's resistance leadership has been compromised, her military background potentially exposed. Operational security requires immediate adaptation to these changed parameters. "I was just leaving," she insists, maintaining her diversion strategy despite these complications. "You can have the property. I won't cause any trouble." "I'm afraid leaving isn't an option anymore," Hawkins informs her coldly. "Your presence is required elsewhere. Our employer has expressed specific interest in meeting the widow who's caused so much inconvenience to his operation." Eleanor processes this development with combat-honed clarity. The diversion has succeeded in drawing raider attention from town searches, potentially securing Samuel and Clara's escape route. But the operation has transitioned from simple detention to something more significant, direct interest from the criminal organization's leadership. This presents both elevated risk and unique intelligence-gathering opportunity. Access to the Operations Command structure could provide crucial evidence of the broader criminal conspiracy beyond local intimidation tactics. "I'm just a widow with an orchard," Eleanor protests, calculating optimal responses as raiders secure her wagon and personal belongings. "I don't understand why—" "Let's dispense with the performances," Hawkins interrupts with unexpected perception. "We both know there's more to your story than apple trees and sourdough bread. The question is how much more our employer will extract before tonight's operation concludes." The implications hang between them. Threat and counter-assessment, predator recognizing potential prey, might possess unexpected capabilities. Eleanor allows appropriate fear to show while maintaining her tactical awareness of surrounding forces, escape vectors, and response options. "Where are you taking me?" she asks, her voice calibrated to project civilian distress while her mind calculates counter-interrogation strategies developed during Confederate captivity. "To meet the man who actually owns Whistling Creek Valley," Hawkins responds, with cold finality. "The man whose plans you've been interfering with. I imagine you'll find the conversation quite illuminating." As they secure her in the wagon, Eleanor maintains her frightened widow performance while mentally transitioning to the next operational phase. The diversion strategy has evolved beyond initial parameters, creating unexpected access to the Criminal Operations Command structure. Whether this represents mission compromise or intelligence opportunity depends entirely on how effectively Lieutenant Blackwood can maintain her cover while gathering evidence at the heart of the criminal conspiracy threatening Whistling Creek Valley. The auxiliary communications facility proves disappointingly effective as a detention structure. Solid construction, single entrance heavily guarded, no windows large enough for human passage. Eleanor studies her surroundings with professional assessment, calculating options against increasingly constrained parameters. Two guards maintain position outside, while activity throughout the compound suggests accelerating preparations for tonight's operation. Through a narrow ventilation opening, she observes wagon teams being prepared, security positions reinforced, and equipment packed for rapid evacuation. Sullivan's acceleration order has transformed a methodical criminal enterprise into an urgent withdrawal operation, a tactical response to approaching federal intervention. Eleanor's captivity represents both mission compromise and strategic opportunity. Her current position provides unprecedented access to the operations command infrastructure precisely when their most valuable shipment arrives. The challenge lies in leveraging this access despite physical constraints. The facility's interior contains communication equipment, telegraph apparatus, document files, and operational schedules apparently relocated for tonight's activities. Eleanor examines these materials with careful efficiency, gathering critical intelligence about Western Summit's broader operations. The documents reveal smuggling networks extending throughout Western territories, corrupt officials on company, payroll and transportation schedules for contraband disguised as railroad construction materials. Most significantly, she discovers shipping manifests for tonight's delivery, military-grade explosives diverted from Army supply routes, intended for illegal distribution to mining operations throughout Nevada territory. The quantities suggest industrial-scale theft rather than opportunistic smuggling. A commotion outside draws her attention back to the ventilation opening. 3 riders approach the compound at urgent pace, Quinn among them, his expression suggesting conflict rather than routine reporting. Through limited auditory access, Eleanor catches fragments of his conversation with perimeter guards, militia unit approaching from Carson City, Marshall leading personally, approximately 2 hours out. The intelligence confirms their resistance operations success, federal intervention indeed approaching, timeline consistent with Samuel and Clara successfully delivering their evidence packet. Quinn's unexpected role as information courier suggests internal fractures within the radar organization, precisely the operational vulnerability she'd hoped to exploit. Guards escort Quinn towards Sullivan's command center, their body language indicating tension rather than routine procedure. Eleanor calculates that his arrival represents significant intelligence about federal approach vectors, information that might indicate which evacuation routes Sullivan will prioritize. Her assessment is interrupted by unexpected development. The lock mechanism on the detention facility door being carefully manipulated from outside. Not the authoritative entry of official guards, but the deliberate stealth of unauthorized access. Eleanor positions herself for potential confrontation, calculating optimal response based on limited defensive options within the confined space. The door opens to reveal Timothy Fletcher, the miller's son, his expression combining determination with barely controlled fear. "Lieutenant Blackwood," he whispers urgently, checking surroundings for immediate threats. "Dr. Collins sent me. We don't have much time." Eleanor processes this astonishing development with combat-honed efficiency. Timothy's presence indicates Martha has implemented contingency protocols, utilizing the boy's small stature and infiltration, capabilities to access areas adults couldn't penetrate. "How did you get into the compound?" she asks, already moving toward the door while mentally calculating escape vectors against observed security patterns. "Crawled under the supply wagons," Timothy explains with practical pride. "Been hiding since morning, followed when they brought you in." Eleanor assesses the immediate tactical situation. Timothy's unexpected rescue attempt creates an extraction opportunity precisely when she's gathered critical intelligence about tonight's operation. Operational success now requires reaching Marshal Roberts with this information before Sullivan's. Smuggling shipment arrives. We need to reach the eastern perimeter, she instructs, automatically shifting to command mode with this unexpected resistance asset. Stay low, move only when I signal. If we're separated, head southeast toward Whistling Creek. Timothy nods with surprising composure, accepting her authority without question. The trust in his eyes reminds Eleanor of younger scouts during desperate operations behind Confederate lines, civilians thrust into combat roles by circumstance rather than training. They exit the facility during scheduled guard rotation, a security vulnerability Eleanor had identified during her initial assessment. Utilizing supply crates for concealment, they navigate the compound's eastern section with careful efficiency. Perimeter security remains focused outward rather than inward, a standard procedure error Eleanor exploits with professional precision. "What happened in town after my capture?" she asks during momentary concealment behind wagon assemblies. "Everyone's fighting back," Timothy reports with undisguised admiration. "Not with guns. Dr. Collins is treating raiders with wrong medicines, making them sleep instead of staying alert. Mr. McIntyre made wagon wheels that break after 5 miles. Even my ma is serving raiders food that gives them stomach problems." Eleanor processes this intelligence with professional approval. Her resistance network has implemented asymmetric countermeasures rather than direct confrontation, precisely the strategy she'd developed for civilian resistance against superior forces. "Marshal Roberts is coming," Timothy continues eagerly. "Dr. Collins got word from Carson City, but Mr. McIntyre says we need to slow down the explosives shipment until he arrives." "Explosives confirmed," Eleanor acknowledges, gathering final intelligence pieces into a coherent operational picture. Military-grade blasting materials being smuggled through Whistling Creek Valley, coming through the northern approach within the hour based on an accelerated timeline. They reach the compound's eastern perimeter during shift change, another security vulnerability created by Sullivan's accelerated timeline. Coordinated guard rotations have degraded under pressure of evacuation preparations. Eleanor exploits this gap with practiced efficiency, guiding Timothy through fence sections with reduced observation coverage. Once beyond the immediate security perimeter, she pauses to assess optimal approach vectors toward town. The direct route risks interception by raider patrols, while forest paths offer concealment at cost of increased transit time. Their decision is complicated by approaching riders, 3 raiders moving rapidly along the main road. Eleanor guides Timothy into dense underbrush, calculating confrontation risks against mission requirements. Direct conflict jeopardizes their intelligence delivery objective, yet timing remains critical, with Sullivan's operation reaching culmination. The riders pass their position without detection, their conversation carrying clearly in the afternoon air. Sullivan wants everything moved by nightfall, shipping special cargo through Devil's Canyon instead of the main road. Marshall won't expect an alternate route. Eleanor processes this critical intelligence immediately. Sullivan has identified counter-surveillance measures, adjusting smuggling routes to bypass expected federal interception points. Devil's Canyon, a treacherous passage east of Main Valley approach, technically impassable for wagons, but potentially viable for pack animals carrying high-value contraband. "We need to split up," she instructs Timothy, making tactical decisions based on mission parameters and asset capabilities. "You return to town through a forest path. Inform McIntyre about Devil's Canyon route change. Marshall needs to adjust. Interception position immediately." "What about you?" Timothy asks, recognizing her instructions imply separate missions rather than shared extraction. Eleanor studies the northern horizon, where dust clouds suggest approaching shipment. I'm going to delay the explosives delivery, create time for Marshal Roberts to adjust his approach. Timothy's expression reveals immediate understanding and concern. That's really dangerous. They have lots of men with guns, but only amateur. Tactical training, Eleanor responds with quiet confidence. The cavalry officer fully emergent now that operational parameters require direct action. And they've never faced someone with specialized counter-smuggling experience. She provides Timothy precise instructions for reaching town through concealed routes, recognition codes for contacting their resistance network, and specific intelligence about Sullivan's evacuation timeline. The boy absorbs these with remarkable focus despite the circumstances, his natural adaptability transforming civilian youth into effective resistance courier. Lieutenant Blackwood, Timothy asks as they prepare to separate on different missions. After this is over, will you teach me to shoot like you did in the war? The question triggers an unexpected emotional response. Memories of young recruits she'd trained during desperate defensive operations in Tennessee, many who never survived to apply those skills in second engagements. For 7 years, Eleanor Blackwood had suppressed the cavalry officer whose decisions carried life and death consequences for those under her command. Let's focus on today's operation first, she responds, finding balance between military directness and civilian compassion. Then we'll discuss appropriate skills for peacetime. They separate, Timothy moving southeast toward town through forest. Concealment, Eleanor heading northwest to intercept the approaching explosives shipment. Her immediate mission parameters emerge with combat clarity. Delay shipment delivery long enough for Marshal Roberts to adjust interception position to Devil's Canyon route. She navigates difficult terrain with practiced efficiency, utilizing topographical features to maintain concealment while maximizing transit speed. Years of orchard management have kept her physically conditioned despite civilian appearance, endurance and strength preserved beneath the widow's gentle demeanor. The northern approach provides multiple potential interception points. Eleanor calculates optimal position based on terrain features, likely security protocols, and mission objectives. Direct confrontation would prove suicidal against superior numbers, but strategic disruption requires only temporary shipment delay rather than permanent interdiction. She selects an interception position where the trail narrows between rocky outcroppings, natural choke point providing both concealment and operational advantage. The location forces pack horses into single-file passage, limiting the security team's maneuverability while maximizing impact of disruption activities. From a concealed observation point, Eleanor confirms approaching shipment. 12 pack horses, carrying secured cargo containers, an escort team of 8 armed raiders, including Hawkins himself, leading the formation. The security presence exceeds normal smuggling operations, confirming the shipment's exceptional value to Sullivan's organization. Eleanor implements countermeasures developed during Confederate supply interdiction operations. Simple tools, rocks, strategically positioned to appear as natural trail hazards, disturbed ground creating the impression of unstable passage, broken branches suggesting recent rockslide activity. Amateur psychological deterrents that nonetheless create crucial hesitation among security teams lacking combat experience. The shipment approaches her position with increasing caution, escorts noting apparent trail deterioration, pack horses responding nervously to disturbed ground conditions. Hawkins halts the formation, examining trail conditions with visible concern. Security team dismounts to check passage stability, exactly the delay Eleanor's mission requires. Trail's been tampered with, Monroe observes, indicating disturbed. Ground patterns. These breaks are fresh. Someone's been through here recently. Marshall's advanced scouts. Another raider suggests, hand moving unconsciously toward holstered weapon. Hawkins studies surrounding terrain with growing suspicion. Spread out. Check the perimeter. Could be natural damage, but take no chances. Sullivan wants this shipment at the processing facility within the hour. The security team's response creates additional delay. Men examining surrounding terrain for potential threats. Pack horses growing increasingly nervous in confined space. Loading arrangements requiring adjustment after preliminary movement. Minutes accumulate into a crucial time frame for Marshal Roberts to adjust interception parameters based on Timothy's intelligence delivery. Eleanor observes from concealed position, calculating whether additional disruption serves mission objectives or risks compromising her position. The current delay already provides significant tactical advantage for federal intervention, while direct engagement might jeopardize ultimate mission success. Her decision is interrupted by unexpected development. Quinn arriving from Sullivan's compound, his expression suggesting conflict rather than routine coordination. Marshall's changed course, he reports to Hawkins with poorly concealed tension. Not following the main road anymore. Sullivan says they're heading toward Devil's Canyon. We need to reroute immediately. Hawkins processes this intelligence with visible frustration. That's impossible. Nobody knows about the canyon route except our own people. Somebody talked, Quinn responds, his tone carrying a subtle accusation. Sullivan's implementing a full evacuation protocol. Says to abandon the processing facility and move directly to the secondary rally point. Eleanor absorbs this critical intelligence from her observation position. Timothy successfully delivered information about route changes to Marshal Roberts, who adjusted federal interception plans accordingly. Sullivan's accelerated evacuation indicates recognition that his operation has been compromised beyond recovery. We can't take 12 pack horses through the Northern Passage, Hawkins objects, indicating specialized cargo containers. Trails too narrow for loaded animals. Sullivan doesn't care about delivery protocols anymore, Quinn counters with growing tension. Says to dump cargo if necessary. Just get our people out before federal agents arrive. The instruction reveals organizational fracturing under pressure. Operational discipline degrading as criminal enterprise faces imminent discovery. Eleanor recognizes the pattern from battlefield observations, when Confederate units realized they faced encirclement by superior Union forces. Quinn's next statement confirms this assessment. Sullivan's already gathering documents from headquarters. Wagon teams heading for Montana Territory tonight. Anyone not at rally point by midnight gets left behind. The Raiders' response reveals internal divisions previously concealed beneath the Outlaw Brotherhood facade. Some advocate immediate abandonment of valuable cargo to ensure personal escape. Others insist on completing delivery despite increasing risk. Hawkins attempts to maintain command authority as division spreads through the security team. We deliver. As planned, he insists with desperation rather than confidence. Sullivan rewards loyalty. Those who complete assignments get positions in the Montana operation. Sullivan rewards success, Quinn counters with unexpected authority. This valley's blown. Federal marshals arriving within the hour. Anyone caught with military explosives faces hanging. The confrontation escalates as the security team divides between competing priorities, completing missions versus ensuring survival. Eleanor observes this organizational fracturing with professional assessment, recognizing optimal moments for strategic withdrawal to rendezvous with approaching federal forces. Her extraction plan is interrupted by final unexpected development of the distant thunder of approaching horses from the south. Not the measured pace of pack horses carrying contraband, but the urgent gallop of mounted law enforcement in pursuit formation. Raiders, attention! A commanding voice carries across the valley. This is United States Marshal James Roberts. You are surrounded by federal agents. Surrender immediately. Through field glasses, Eleanor confirms Marshal Roberts has arrived with significant force, at least 20 mounted agents deploying into standard interdiction formation. Their approach vector indicates Timothy's intelligence successfully redirected federal response to intercept Sullivan's alternate smuggling route. The raiders' response demonstrates complete organizational collapse, some abandoning pack horses to flee through difficult terrain, others surrendering immediately, a few including Hawkins attempting resistance despite tactically hopeless position. Quinn stands motionless, hands raised in immediate surrender, his expression suggesting relief rather than defeat. Eleanor remains in a concealed observation position, calculating optimal course as federal intervention achieves primary mission objectives. Sullivan's smuggling operation faces complete interdiction, stolen military explosives recovered by proper authorities, and Whistling Creek Valley liberated from criminal occupation. Marshal Roberts personally oversees prisoner processing, his experienced assessment immediately identifying Quinn as a potential intelligence asset rather than simple criminal detainee. Their conversation carries to Eleanor's position. "You were military before riding with these men," Roberts observes, studying Quinn's bearing rather than outlaw attire. "Lieutenant, 23rd Virginia," Quinn acknowledges quietly. "Made bad choices after Gettysburg." "Not all bad," Roberts counters with surprising insight. "Someone's been feeding intelligence to the Whistling Creek resistance, information too specific for civilian observation. Military details only a former officer would recognize." Quinn neither confirms nor denies this assessment, but his expression suggests internal conflict resolved through recent decisions. "Colonel Sullivan's headquarters is 3 miles north. You'll find documentation of operations throughout Western territories, names of corrupt officials, transportation schedules for contraband shipments." Roberts studies him with professional evaluation. That information might influence sentencing considerations for someone providing continued cooperation. Eleanor processes this exchange with tactical assessment. Quinn apparently served as concealed intelligence source within the raider organization, perhaps motivated by lingering military honor despite criminal association. His cooperation with federal authorities creates potential for dismantling Sullivan's entire criminal network beyond Whistling Creek Valley. She makes final operational decisions based on mission objectives rather than personal visibility. The resistance network successfully achieved its primary goal: federal intervention stopping Sullivan's criminal enterprise. Her continued concealment serves broader operational security regarding her actual military background. As Marshal Roberts organizes prisoner transport and explosive seizure, Eleanor withdraws through a concealed route toward Whistling Creek. Her resistance mission transitions from active countermeasures to community recovery coordination, helping townsfolk reclaim properties, documenting criminal damages for restitution, restoring legitimate governance structures. 3 days later, Eleanor Blackwood tended her apple trees in morning sunlight, the orchard's peaceful routine restored after Sullivan's operation collapsed under federal intervention. Marshal Roberts' agents had dismantled Western Summit's entire infrastructure, arresting Sullivan himself, attempting to escape toward Montana territory. The documentation recovered from his headquarters implicated corrupt officials throughout the territory, triggering broader federal investigation into criminal enterprises disguised as business development. Samuel approaches with the morning newspaper from Carson City, its headline confirming their resistance operation's complete success. "Criminal enterprise dismantled. Western Summit front for major smuggling operation. Town council's meeting today about rebuilding," he informs her, their conversation returning to civilian normality after weeks of resistance operations. Fletcher's reclaiming his mill. McIntyre's reopened the smithy. Martha's clinic is treating actual patients instead of raiders. Eleanor nods with genuine satisfaction, the peaceful orchard owner re-emerging as operational necessity for military precision fades. Whistling Creek recovers quickly, good people rebuilding what matters. Samuel studies her with knowing assessment, the respect of a fellow veteran recognizing completed mission rather than abandoned duty. Some folks in town are talking about your role in organizing resistance. Marshal Roberts himself was asking questions about the tactical expertise demonstrated by local leadership. People protect their homes, Eleanor responds simply, examining apple blossoms with apparent absorption. No special expertise required. Quinn made a statement before they transported prisoners. Samuel continued carefully. Said Sullivan had military records suggesting connections between Whistling Creek resistance leadership and specialized Union cavalry operations during the war. Eleanor maintains focus on her trees, expression revealing nothing beyond civilian concentration on agricultural assessment. Many widows learned useful skills from soldier husbands. War touched everyone, whether they wore uniforms or not. Their conversation is interrupted by approaching wagon. Timothy Fletcher, driving his father's repaired mill cart, face alight with excitement that transcends recent danger. "Mrs. Blackwood," he calls with undisguised admiration. "Pa says we're grinding wheat again tomorrow. First flour since the raiders took our equipment." Eleanor welcomes him with genuine warmth, the widow's gentle demeanor authentic despite the cavalry officer's continued presence beneath civilian identity. "Wonderful news. Perhaps your mother will make those biscuits she's famous for." Timothy glances toward Samuel before lowering his voice conspiratorially. "Marshal Roberts was asking about you before he left for Carson City. Said whoever organized resistance showed remarkable tactical insight for civilian operation. Said it reminded him of specialized cavalry operations during the war." His expression combines admiration with youthful discretion, a boy proud to share connection with someone whose capabilities exceed ordinary understanding, yet respecting unspoken boundaries around certain truths. "Marshal Roberts has dramatic imagination," Eleanor responds, with carefully calibrated dismissal. "People defend their homes using whatever knowledge they possess. Nothing remarkable about protecting what matters." Timothy accepts this with the respectful understanding of someone who's shared extraordinary circumstances with another. "Pa says we'll have an apple harvest soon. Says your orchard survived better than most with all that's happened." "Apple trees are surprisingly resilient," Eleanor observes, genuine affection coloring her assessment of the peaceful livelihood she'd built after leaving military service. "They endure difficult seasons, then produce fruit sweeter for having survived the challenge." The conversation continues with civilian normality, harvest projections, community rebuilding plans, Timothy's excited descriptions of mill equipment being restored to proper function. Eleanor participates with authentic engagement, the orchard owner fully present rather than merely disguising the cavalry officer beneath. As Timothy departs toward town, Samuel observes her with quiet understanding. Lieutenant Blackwood remains available if needed again, but Eleanor, the orchard owner, seems content with peaceful cultivation. She studies her apple trees, 7 years of civilian growth representing personal restoration after war's destruction. The military precision that once made her the Union Army's most effective cavalry sharpshooter now channels into systematic orchard management rather than combat operations. Eleanor tends her orchard. She acknowledges with simple clarity, "Lieutenant Blackwood remains available if threats require her particular capabilities. Both exist within the same person, serving different purposes in different seasons." Samuel accepts this with the understanding of someone who's navigated a similar transition from military identity to civilian purpose. The valley's safe again. Raiders defeated. Sullivan's operation was dismantled. Mission accomplished by any military standard. Eleanor smiles with genuine peace, the widow and the warrior finding harmony rather than conflict within her complicated identity. Then today, we tend apple trees. Tomorrow, we prepare for harvest. The lieutenant can rest while the orchard owner cultivates what she's planted. The morning sun illuminates peaceful productivity throughout Whistling Creek Valley. Mills grinding, smithy fires burning, orchards blooming toward eventual harvest. Eleanor Blackwood moves among her apple trees with careful precision that serves cultivation rather than combat, the cavalry officer's capabilities preserved beneath the widow's gentle hands. Both identities are authentic. Both serve a purpose. Both protect what matters through different means in different seasons. The warrior rests while the orchard blooms, but remains ready should threats arise against those under her protection. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.